My bad. All right. Okay. I think we are good to go. Hello, everyone. Welcome to Design and Play Episode 5, where we will be talking about Yooka-Laylee. And before we actually get started, I want to talk about a couple things. One, I am sorry that this episode took a little bit longer to come out than the other ones. I had just a rough week. A lot of things got in the way, so I kind of pushed everything back a little bit. But also, I sent an email to Playtonic with some questions about the development of the game, hoping that they would get back to me. They did not get back to me, which is fine. I mean, obviously, COVID's going on, and they're all working from home. I'm sure they're still working on games at the moment, so I'm sure things are a little bit out of place, and they're very busy. It happens. And the questions I asked were all over the place, tons of different topics, different parts of game design, not something that one person necessarily would be able to confidently answer, I imagine. So it would have required reaching to a bunch of different people, and for all I know, they could get back to me within the next the day after, or maybe the second I cut stream and the discussion ends, they could respond with email. Who knows? But if there is anyone who happens to come across this video who does work at Playtonics, and maybe the email got lost somewhere and you are willing to answer the questions, I will, at the end of the video, I will have a timestamp where we can go to that, and I will basically list off the questions. And if you are someone who does work there and you are interested in answering the questions, that would be awesome. I would appreciate that, and hopefully you could do it there. But I believe that's pretty much it. I mean, the next game we're going to be doing is Portal 1 and Portal 2. We will be starting that tomorrow. I'll start Portal 1 because it's a pretty short game and I played through it, so it won't take too long for me to get through. Portal 2, it's been forever since I played. It's a much longer game, and I don't really remember the answer to the questions to those puzzles nearly to the extent that I do with Portal 1. So that'll probably take a little bit longer. But yeah, we'll be starting that tomorrow, Portal 1 and Portal 2. And then, of course, we will have the discussion afterwards. What? Excuse me. I think that's pretty much it. I got my notes. I think we're good to go. We got our music. Hopefully the audio level is pretty good. I think it's, I've finally understood how to balance audio a little bit better. So hopefully that's good. But yeah, we'll just hop into it. So Yooka-Laylee is a discussion topic that we are having today. It is a game that came out April 11, 2017, the day before my birthday, and it was made by Playtonic Games. This was a company that was founded by 6 individual members that were originally from Rareware, the company that was most known for making games for the Nintendo 64, and that was eventually purchased and acquired by Microsoft, and they made games for them. Rareware is most known for making the Banjo-Kazooie series. They made the Donkey Kong Country series, Donkey Kong 64. They made GoldenEye. They made Perfect Dark Zero. They made Killer Instinct. They made tons of different games. The Viva Pinata series, the Connect Sports series. They made tons of different games over the years, but eventually they splintered off and wanted to create, some of the members splintered off from Rare and decided to create their own studio, and that was called Playtonics. So the original founding of the studio was by 6 members. They eventually expanded to, I believe it's around 15 members was for Yooka-Laylee. But when it comes to Rare in the olden days and Playtonic in the current days, I feel like the name that is known most is Grant Kirkhope, which is fair. Grant is an awesome dude. He's very nice. He's very responsible, very responsive. I hope he's responsible, very accessible. People tweet to him all the times with them doing covers of their songs, and he will respond to it and give praise. They'll just ask him random questions and he will respond as well. So he's just a very accessible individual. So it makes total sense why he kind of ends up being the known public face for Rareware and Playtonics. But I also think it's kind of not fair because there's so many different people who work at the studio and so many different people who have a huge impact. And based on what I've seen in the interviews, they are all just as awesome of people as Grant is. It's no surprise that they mesh together so well personality-wise. So they seem like awesome people. I want to take some time to also throw out the names of some of the other people who work at Playtonics, so that they get a little bit more attention that I think they deserve. So I figured we just go down the list of the 6 original people who started Playtonics, the 6 founders. So we have Chris Sunderland, who was the project director of the Yooka-Laylee series. He is the voice of Banjo. He plays the voice of Kazooie, and he also ended up doing the voices for both Yooka and Laylee. And then we have Steve Males, who was the character art director. So he's the one who ends up creating the excuse me, the concept art and the direction for the characters specifically, and he is the person who created the designs for Banjo and Kazooie. And then we also have Stephen Hurst, who is the environment art director, so they create the art and the design of the actual worlds and the locations themselves, not so much the characters. And he created the 3D worlds for Yooka-Laylee. He also created them for Banjo-Kazooie and Viva Pinata. We have Gavin Price, who is the managing director and creative lead. As far as I could gather, he's basically the producer of Yooka-Laylee, which is, he's basically the middleman. He's the person who knows a lot about, or he knows a little bit about every single group, and whenever there's an issue, he can kind of be the middleman that redirects all that information to make sure everything is working smoothly together in the project. We have Jens Restmeyer, who is the software engineer, so basically one of the coders. We have Mark Stevenson, who is the art director, so not specifically just for the character or the worlds, but just art in general for the whole game. And then, of course, we have Grant Kirkhope. He's not one of the 6 original founders. He was brought on along with David Wise later, but he, you know, again, he's the man who made the music for the game, one of the people who made the music for the Yooka-Laylee series. And he is also known for making the music for Banjo-Kazooie, Donkey Kong 64, and also Mario and Rabbids Raven Kingdom. A lot of people seem to have forgotten about that. And I was very excited when the game came out, and I was very satisfied with what we heard. God, it was so good. But that's, you know, just a handful of the original people who work at Playtonic and who founded it. And there, I mean, we're talking about the background info on the IP, but there really isn't much background info to go on because this was the start of the IP. This was the creation of the Yooka-Laylee IP. It is a spiritual successor. It was meant to be a spiritual successor to Banjo-Kazooie, but at that point, talking about the background of the IP would be basically going back and talking about the background of Banjo-Kazooie. We kind of lightly touched on that a little bit in Banjo-Kazooie Nuts and Bolts. And as I said in the discussion with Nuts and Bolts, the background on Banjo-Kazooie then goes back down, it goes further back to the background and development of Project Dream, which that alone could be a full 2-hour discussion because there's so much fascinating info about it. So, yeah, as far as the background for Yooka-Laylee, it was a game that came out April 2017. It was made by Playtonic Games, a studio that was founded by a group of former Rareware indies, Rareware employees, and they brought in more people from Rareware, and the game was just meant to be a spiritual successor to Banjo-Kazooie. As far as that's really all we can draw upon for info on Yooka-Laylee. So we'll kind of just get into how Yooka-Laylee itself took shape. Hey, what's up, Andy? How are you doing? About this one compared to the last one, I was very, very excited for when this game was announced, and I followed it a decent amount through development. I tried to leave as much as I could to be a surprise for when the game came out, but I was following it decently close as the game was being developed. And I was very excited to do research on this as well. And this had, I mean, Banjo-Kazooie had a ton of info about research in the game. There was tons of interviews, and over the years we can get background info about the development of Banjo and all the things that changed all throughout development and everything like that. 2E didn't really have much in shape of that, and Nuts and Bolts also didn't quite have as much information. Banjo 2 is literally just an expansion of Kazooie, so there wasn't as much to be learned about. And Nuts and Bolts, I'm not sure if they were just a little bit more secretive when it came to the development of their game, since they were under acquisition of Microsoft, so maybe things were run a little bit differently, but there was still a decent amount of info with Nuts and Bolts. Yooka-Laylee had tons of info, but that was also because, ooh, this is really loud. Really loud compared to the rest of it. Yooka-Laylee had tons of info, tons of interviews, very public-facing about the development of the game, but that's also because of this development for this game was a little bit different with it being a Kickstarter. So we'll get into that even more. I think it's a different era. Yes, crowdfunding, it plays a very big part in so many different parts about the development of this game and also our knowledge on the game. So we'll get into how Yooka-Laylee ended up taking shape. So Playtonics, when they formed their group, they got together and they knew they obviously wanted to make a game, and they knew early on they wanted to make a platformer, but they didn't know if they wanted to make it a 2D platformer or if they wanted to make a 3D platformer. And they eventually decided they wanted to make it a 3D platformer because they thought it would resonate with people more. And there also wasn't a whole lot of 3D platformers around at the time. We'll talk about that a little bit later, but around the time there just wasn't a whole lot of 3D platformers. So they thought it would resonate with people because it's just something that they know better, and it's what people would kind of expect of them, and there just wasn't a whole lot coming out at that time. And Chris Sunderland, again, the project director for the game, who is also has, I believe, 30 years experience. This man's been around, and he knows quite a bit about game development, said in an interview after the game had come out that in hindsight, that it might have been a better idea for them to do a 2D game first based on the size of their team and how much added complexity there is to a 3D game. But they still ended up going with a 3D, and they ended up getting out. But they decided on the 3D, and on top of it, besides there not being many 3D platformers, there was pretty much no 3D Collectathon platformers. So they were, at the time, very excited to jump into doing a 3D game. So when they decided on making a 3D platformer, they, started the process on creating the game, and they started working on the characters. And the original protagonist design was at first a lion. And this didn't last too long because they felt like he was too much of a champion protagonist. They're much more used to creating underdog type of characters, while Banjo is a bear, which most people know they are formidable creatures. Banjo is definitely not like the typical grizzly bear that you think of. He's more of a goofy, kind of laid-back type of bear. So they definitely are more of a underdog, laid-back type of character, as opposed to doing the stereotypical champion character that you expect to succeed and make it through. So after deciding they didn't want to do a lion, they bounced around a couple of different ideas, and they ended up settling on a chameleon. I can't remember who specifically it was, but I believe it was the character art director who was had a huge fascination with chameleons and pitched the ideas and created a rough outline of the idea of a chameleon character, and the team ended up liking it for the design. But also on top of it, chameleons had a really huge benefit where they have a lot of properties about them that is very easy to gamify and make into game mechanics. So chameleons have their skin changes color, so that easily can turn into the invisibility ability. They can also change the color of Yooka's skin to show different properties associated with it, like when he eats the cannonball and the tips of his I don't even know what they're called, wings kind of on his head, they change to a darker color to signify that he is heavy. Or if he eats the water berries, then he can shoot at water, and they also change the color of his skin representative to that. So having the skin change color is very easy to gamify and make it a game mechanics. He has the very long tongue, which makes it crests. That sounds accurate, thank you. Frills also works. He also has the long tongue, which makes it easy to, eat other enemies to gain health and things like that. So chameleons was just a perfect type of animal archetype to build in a video game character around. So they ended up going with that. And then also early on in development, they also knew they wanted to have some kind of flight mechanic, and they weren't exactly shy to the idea of having a partner duo kind of character for their game. So they decided on something that could get flight, and they decided that a bat was unique enough from a Regal that they could roll with a bat. And they also felt that bats were underrepresented in video games, whereas most of the time, if bats do even appear, they tend to be seen as fodder enemies or bad guys, something that really is always on the negative end of the spectrum, as opposed to being a protagonist or the good guy. They definitely have a negative archetype around them, so they felt it worked great with their unorthodox principles and how they approach character design, that having a bat as one of the main characters, the good guys, worked even greater. And just like the chameleon, the bat has a lot of unique properties about the bat that is great for gamification. They have like the echolocation and the sonar abilities, the ability to fly, things like that make it very easy to take things about bats that we are familiar with and turn it into a game property that that people can grasp at a lot more easier and latch onto because they have real world connections to them. Didn't research chameleon anatomy. I know, I'm sorry, I'm slipping. Clearly, we're on episode 5. My capabilities as a host and an educator is slipping. This project was doomed to fail from the start. How many types of animal-based characters are there in Yooka-Laylee, or just in general? Because animal-based characters are pretty common. They aren't as common nowadays. I feel like games headed the direction of gritty realism for quite a long time, and it took a while for them to stray from it. And I think we're now getting to a point again where people are totally fine with having gritty realism and goofy cartoony character type of games. And then there's just the middle games where it's not gritty realism, it's human realistic, but people are aware it's a video game kind of thing. So I think we're kind of getting a second renaissance type of thing where games can be cartoony and playful, and that's totally fine. It's not kind of looked down upon and seen immediately as childish, at least as much as it was in the past. Yeah, the mascot era of the 90s was almost all animals. They had Crash Bandicoot, they had Spyro, they had Sonic, Banjo-Kazooie, Mario. I mean, he's an Italian. Everyone knows those aren't really humans, so... Yeah, no, the mascot plumbers were definitely the big thing. And I mean, just speaking from my own personal experience, I wanted to have some Donkey Kong, yeah. I wanted to have some kind of mascot for my channel, and I definitely thought that having an animal is definitely easier. And I think it's because with animals, we tend to see them as cute just by default. When we see another human being, we tend to be more judgmental. I mean, you look at dogs, you look at pugs, and they're squished flat faces, and like they have like they're like, if dogs have like an overbite, it's really cute. And I just remember looking at dogs and like, man, I really wish I could be a dog because I could be the ugliest thing on earth and people think I'm adorable, because that's just how it is. I think when it came to animal mascots, they were kind of going for that, something that people would look at and love or think is cute because they're not being as judgmental, because they're not human, because they don't see themselves in them as much. So yeah, animal mascots were huge back in the 90s. Any hybrid kind of characters? Like the Chimera in Full Metal Alchemist hybrid? I'm not sure what you mean by hybrid. I don't think there's any characters in Yooka-Laylee, or I can't really think of any characters in general that's like they've got two heads, one's an animal head and one's like a human head. The only thing I can think of is literally the character in Doom Patrol, the show. I don't really think there's many hybrid characters that are like that. I mean, I do know that tends to be like a mythological thing. Like there's the Minotaur in old mythology, but those tend to be more games that are focused more on that type of stuff, like God of War or Dark Souls. I think it's definitely possible. Obviously, they could put a half human, half type of animal character in this game, and I think they definitely could make it work, but I don't think it's something that most people think of. I think most people think of those things as monstrosities or evil. A horseman or something like that? No, I don't think they have anything like that. They have, I mean, a lot of the animals in this game fill human type roles, so they have like the pigs are knights. They have trying to think that the shopping carts, that's what they're called, that are kind of like human-like creatures as well. But no, most things are just brought to life. Most things are just personified. Playtonic's whole thing is just putting googly eyes on characters and then therefore making them living creatures. There's not really so much melding between taking some inanimate object or a creature and making a human. Yeah, Dr. Puzz would probably be the closest one, but that's because of a genetic experiment. She was trying to transform something and she ended up getting caught halfway between. It was a mistake. It wasn't necessarily a naturally occurring thing. So I guess, yeah, that's true. Dr. Puzz does exist. She is half octopus, half human. But I don't really think there exist many hybrid types of characters in the Yooka-Laylee universe. So they decided on Yooka being a chameleon and Laylee being a bat. They decided they want to have a 3D platformer, and at that point they started working on the game, and after they had something to show, they eventually launched their Kickstarter on Yooka-Laylee once they had more of a clear vision. And within 40 minutes of launching their Kickstarter, they met their goal of $270,000. And at the time of the Kickstarter going, it was the fastest Kickstarter to ever reach $1 million in just 6 hours. And once the Kickstarter ended, they had raised $2.7 million and 73,000 backers. So it was a rousing success, to say the least. And something very, very interesting, usually when you go to a Kickstarter, they launch the Kickstarter with some kind of video explaining whatever the product is. They showcase some of the product, that it is a physical thing that they're working on. It has taken shape in some way. In the case of video games, they would usually show product demos and the progress they built with the game. And if you go back and watch the video on Kickstarter, what was fascinating to find out was that everything you saw in that Kickstarter launch video was made by 6 people in 3 months. Everything that they showed, which is crazy. And they said that the reason why they were able to get so much work done so quickly is because they were an independent studio and they didn't have to worry about a chain of command. They didn't have to worry about making a huge change or going a completely different direction or veering off onto a different task, because they didn't have to go up a huge chain of command and wait for some higher up to give approval where they're allowed to do it. They were able to basically yell out to the other end of the room, say, can I do this? Can I try this? And then it was either a simple yes or no. Or if they had a question, they need a suggestion, they needed feedback. It wasn't a case of when some individual, whoever was their superior at that time, who could come and give feedback, it wasn't a matter of waiting for them to clear time in their schedule where they could come down and give them the feedback and suggestion. It was literally walking across the room. So because they were working on a smaller team and they didn't have to worry about a chain of command where the entire chain of command was in one room, they were able to, you know, get more work done and have more of a working product to show a lot quicker. But it just blew my mind when I found out that everything in that trailer was made by 6 people in under 3 months. Absolutely crazy. So after the rousing success of the Kickstarter had finished, they had their funding, they had their money to work with, they had run into, at that point, new issues, issues that they had never, ever dealt with. As I said before, there was the individual, Chris Sunderland, who was the project director. He's basically the one in charge who makes the final calls. While they all were a group together, if there was ever kind of a tie, if they didn't know what to do, he would basically be the individual who would make the final vote and be the final decision on where things were going. Chris Sunderland, he's also the individual who has 30 years experience in the industry, so he has seen quite a bit, was also running into issues he had never dealt with before because of the fact they went with the Kickstarter. This presented new issues, new problems, new obstacles. So when they were making their Kickstarter, when they were making the game through Kickstarter, they had to show progress of the game to the backers, but without any context. This is really different from how it worked in the past, they said, because in the past they would, you know, they'd announce a game, they show a little bit, you know, some kind of trailer, they'd disappear for about a year, show a little bit more, disappear for another year and a half, and then they just come out with the game. That's generally how it works, but they obviously could not do that now. Now they would have to constantly give updates and show progress of the development of the game, so that, you know, backers would realize that the game was still being made and produced, it was being created. They didn't just take the money and run. It was basically, you know, during the game development process, obviously they have higher ups, they have superiors that they have to show the progress of the game to, so that they can give their call, the quality control, if it's working, if it's good or not. They obviously have to do that as well for the backers, but also to make them feel like, hey, we're still working, this is progress, we're not disappearing, it's still coming along. The problem is they're trying to show the backers the content as it's being created, and they're also trying to leave something there, some kind of element to surprise, so that the experience isn't entirely ruined. They're not showing the entire game from the front. But the other problem with that is some mechanics in some parts of the game, if they're not given context, they might look lazy, they might look weird, they might look just flat out bad, something that's undesirable, might seem like a waste of time. And so they have this issue where they're trying to show people the progress of the game. They're trying to show that the game is still in the works, but they're trying not to show everything about it, so that the experience, there's still an experience to be had there. But if there is negative backlash, or people are not happy with what they're seeing because they're not getting the context, it's a very rough decision on the developers to make the decision of, okay, do we trust our instinct? Do we trust our gut and continue working with this mechanic because we truly do believe people will enjoy it in the right context? Or do we listen to the people who are essentially our boss, the people who gave us the ability to do this in the first place? Do we listen to them, their negative feedback, and change it or drop it entirely? This was an issue that none of them had dealt with, and none of them had any idea really what to do, how to handle it, and kind of just played it by ear on these types of situations. I remember some earlier artwork that showed Yooka and Laylee platforming in an underground area, collecting play coins, which made me think that was a bigger collectible before quills were introduced. Yeah, I remember seeing that too. It was really interesting. They had coins while they were going through, jumping as their main collectibles instead of quills. And I remember, wow, those ended up becoming the play coins, which you only collect one of, but that was also very early in development. I'm assuming before Rextro had fully come through, but it just goes to show how much games change in those early days. That, I believe that early underground cave area, I believe was Tribal Stack Tropics. I believe that was the first level, because that was also very early in design, and early in the design phase, you can clearly see what is Tribal Stack Tropics, and then in that same video, they also show an underground area, so I'm assuming it was meant to be in that same first level as well. It's practically a gamble. It is. It really is. But it's not just a gamble where you're making your boss upset or, you know, making decisions that they're not a huge fan of. It's a huge decision where the fans, who are the reason you're creating the game in the first place, both because they gave you the money, but also you're creating it for them in hopes that they can support you in future games. If you go against them and make them upset, that's a big problem. So it is a huge gamble. Ratchet Alien and an animal looking, but now we're drilling for Yooka-Laylee. Well, I mean, again, it's about, you guys can ask suggestions all you want or give examples all you want. That's the whole point of these discussions in the first place, is to actually host discussions. And if it gets too off task, then I'll be the one who gets it back on track. That's my job. From a proto build that was scrapped, the actual game started in a separate build. Okay, that makes sense too. Yeah, stuff gets scrapped all the time during game development. So yeah, one of the main issues that they had was trying to keep backers and fans up to date with the development of the game, but trying to do it in a right way, because it was something they'd never approached before, never done before, and they didn't exactly know how to handle it. Another issue that they had with the Kickstarter was the Kickstarter promised certain content. In game design, stuff is cut all the time. As Bryman just said, the underground area was from a proto build that was scrapped. The actual game started in a separate build. They had an entire, if you go back and you look at the Kickstarter video, actually, you know, I don't want to say that. I don't know if this specific underground area is in the Kickstarter video. I have seen it. I do know it's very early in development, but there are areas where you can see video of them kind of testing and running around in like this built area that has these coins as collectibles instead of quills. So it's very early in development. And they basically scrap the whole area. Game development, it happens all the time where they start working on something and it just isn't working. It's not fun. It doesn't mesh very well. And it becomes this issue where you can spend more time trying to force it to become fun, or you can cut your losses and go with another idea and hope that works out. And that happens a lot of the time. That ends up being what most people end up doing. They much rather find out something is not fun ahead of time, cut it, and start new. That is the most common thing with game development. It is a very difficult thing to do because it really sucks to spend a lot of time creating something and then having to cut it all. But it is a lesson that a lot of game developers learn early on. If something is not fun, you cut it and you move on. With Kickstarter-backed content promises, they didn't have that luxury. They had all these different things. They had the multiplayer mode. They had the Rextro arcade that they promised. They have transformations in every single level. They have bosses in every single level. And some of these worked out and panned out very well. But some of these mechanics, if something wasn't working, they're forced to spend more time working on this. A lot of other times when an idea is not working in a certain area, maybe they can cut it and repurpose it into a different level or into a different game entirely. With this, they are forced to basically shoehorn the idea into the game. They're basically spending more resources on making sure the content that they promised got in is included in a way that feels fun, instead of spending the time thinking of something else new that could be way more fun. The promise basically locked them into this content that they were forced to, by any means necessary, put this content in. And I think this is one of the things about Rextro that a lot of people didn't like, was that some of it just felt kind of out of place. The idea was, people enjoyed it, the idea of it, but once it was put into place, maybe the devs could have even thought the same thing, that maybe the mini games didn't exactly work, or the implementation of it didn't exactly work, but they didn't really have a choice. They're going head first with what necessarily? But yeah, normal game design is about introducing an idea, trying it out. If it doesn't work, either cut it and set it aside for later, cut it and try and repurpose it in a different way that can work better, cut it and try and put somewhere else that makes it mesh and feel better. But as a whole, when you're restricted and you have to add something to the game, it kind of just lowers the overall quality, or it can lower the overall quality of the enjoyment of the game because it's not a full cohesive experience. It kind of can feel like something sticking out and shoehorned and forced in there, and that can generally add to a more negative feel and enjoyment of the level as a whole. But because they had promised certain features into the game by the Kickstarter goals that they had reached, they had no choice. They were forced to add these in. So another huge issue that they talked about having after the Kickstarter backer was merch and other things that need to be sent out to the backers. So time and resources during the development process of the game had to be spent on creating content for what was essentially backer rewards. So they had, if you backed a certain amount, you could get a poster cutout. If you backed a certain amount, you would get a T-shirt, and this was all artwork that had to be created specifically by the team for this merch essentially. And, you know, just because you're an artist, you know how to create artwork, does not mean that you know how to create artwork that works well for poster cutouts or works great for T-shirt designs. Is completely different. I mean, that's why you have emote artists that specifically work in emotes only, because it's very difficult to make emotes in the size of 28 by 28. Just because you know how to make art doesn't mean you know how to make art universally. So this was something new for them. It was also all time that was spent on creating this artwork that was then used for merch could have been spent on the game itself. After they would create the artwork for the shirts and the posters and whatever else was in the backers, they then had to get the content created, the posters and the shirts and everything like that, and then they had to ship it. They thought, again, this was something new to them. They'd never done it themselves, so they figured they could handle it. But again, this game had 73,000 backers. Now, 73,000 people did not all get shirts and posters and socks and all this other stuff, but there was a lot of people who got different pieces of merch sent to them. So they figured that they would be able to handle it themselves. And so they had just cases and cases and cases of all these different pieces of merch that they then had to ship out themselves. They did not get a third party to help with this. They figured they could get it done themselves. So they had their group of 15 to 20 people going and shipping out, let's say generously, about 50,000 shirts and 50,000 socks and 50,000 posters, all to different people all over the world. And again, this was all time and resources that could be spent on creating the game, as opposed to having the individuals going and shipping out everything themselves. 2 weeks straight to sign all the merch. Yeah, there was that too. There was also signatures for posters that the different individuals would go and sign themselves, and they'd have stacks of posters. So they would go, you know, at some point and just sign 100 posters or sign 100 different pieces of merch and move on to the next one. What were these features? You mean the different the Kickstarter goals? It was the Rextro machines. It was the transformations on every single level, the bosses on every single levels, the multiplayer modes. And again, some of these were great. I loved all the bosses. I really liked the transformations, but it's definitely clear that some of the transformations were kind of, maybe not an afterthought, but definitely were more part of the design. And some of them were kind of forced in. Like, it felt with Tribal Staff Tropics, they didn't really have much that they could do with the flower transformation. Because while you can talk to the other plants around the level and get information, and learn more about other hints in the level, I do think that the majority of the transformation in Tribal Stack Tropics is just one pagey and that's it. So, but then you go into Galleon Galaxy, I think the level's called, if I remember, where they have the ship that travels around. The ship has tons that they could do, tons of different interactables and rocks to break and exploration and things to find. So it depended on the level, but definitely some levels had the transformations kind of forced or shoehorned in there compared to other ones. But those were there was definitely a couple issues that they had to overcome and deal with during the development of the game because of the avenue that they decided to choose by going with a Kickstarter as opposed to going with just having a publisher taking care of them. But also because of that, we do know a bit more about the development process of the game because they were so outwardly facing having done a Kickstarter. So let's see. That's as much as... Yep, there's the underground area. That's about as much as I can find that was relevant to the actual development of the game and how the game started to take shape. And I think we can go on to the next subject now, where we talk about games around the release of Yooka-Laylee. So, if you have anything more to offer on the development, go for it. I would love to hear it. Because we still will talk about the actual final product of the game. So there might be more things that we bring up later. And if you bring up something that I will talk about later, I'll let you know about that. But if you have anything that I did not write down, anything I did not find out, anything I did not gather, feel free to share. Absolutely. While you are gathering your thoughts, I'm going to dive in a little bit into the games that came out around the release of Yooka-Laylee. This is something that I like to do for all the discussions because I think it's really interesting to look back on the release period around the game when the game that we're talking in hand was released. A lot of people like to think that X year was the golden year and all the years are crap, that there's a lot of dead years in gaming, but pretty much every year had some kind of huge release that was great. And 2017 was also one of those years that was great as well. I also like to bring up the topic of the games around the release of the game because it definitely shows what the climate of gaming was like, what the industry was looking for, because definitely developer or producers more often will try to push for certain genres of game that they think are in, because it is a business. They are trying to make money. So games that come out in droves tend to be the thing that is pushed, and also the thing that tends to be in more high demand. So looking at the list of games coming around the release of Yooka-Laylee shows what games people, the general public, were looking for. And you can kind of extrapolate what the response was from there. I had to create the builds for E3, Gamescom, that's right. It took development time, resources, as well as the Toy Box and Toy Box Plus. That's even more time. That's a good point. I forgot about that. That was also, the Toy Box was one of the backer goals, if I remember correctly. I'm pretty sure it was. Buddy mode, 2-player, professional. Day 1, pre-final quiz, transformations, minecart sections, buddy mode, local multiplayer. Day 1, going old school, let's play. Music at its best. Huh, I could have sworn there was. I thought there was a backer, a stretch goal for having a play box, a play test. Maybe not. Unless I'm just reading through this too quickly. Commentary video. Multiplayer modes. No. Maybe not. I think that's just what you got for supporting the game in general. But that's true. When it came... That is something that exists in most video games, but it's not exclusive to Kickstarter. So a lot of times when E3 or Gamescom or these other major events come up, the developers have to spend time taking a chunk of the game and making a demo of it. And this takes a lot of time because it's for demos, especially at E3 and Gamescom, these other major events. These are usually games that are in development, and their people's opinions on the game are not quite made up. They're still seeing the game being developed, and things can change at any given moment. So to make a demo like this is really stressful and risky because games change all the time, but they're trying to think of something that's consistent, that they believe will not change, or if it does, it will not change much, but is also a good representation of the game. So taking a demo is very difficult to find something that fits all these criteria. And then it's also just time in of itself because they have to go and then take out a snippet of the game and make it its own demo. And then on top of that, because this is a lot of people's first impressions of the game, they then have to polish it up. So going to E3, they have to find a section of the game that's more finished, better looking quality, that they don't think is going to be tweaked or changed too much from the final product, that they can isolate and separate and create a demo out of, and then work on polishing it and making a better experience so that the people who are unsure about the game can get a hands-on experience and get a better feel for the game. It's a lot of time, a lot of effort, a lot of work, a lot of stress, and it deviates, it basically reallocates sources where instead of working on the game, they are creating this. That is something that happens with all games that go to Gamescom or E3, or games that are going to have a presence where they have a booth where people can have a hands-on demo. This is something that exists for all those games. So that is important to bring up. especially is more valid because of the size of their team being so small, but it's not something that's exclusive to Kickstarter. This wasn't not an obstacle that they came across because they chose Kickstarter. But that is a very valid point. And then they also have the Toy Box and the Toy Box Plus, which was a very similar thing like that. But it was basically a test to understand the mechanics of the game, the movements of the characters, to see their personality, to see how they interact with the world, to get a grasp for their mechanics, which I imagine was not nearly stressful because the Toy Box was... it wasn't textured, it was just blocks. Yooka and Laylee were in their full form. They were created, they had their personality, they were cleaned up and made nice. But I mean, I feel like that was something, I mean, that they show that in the demo for the launch video for Kickstarter. So I imagine that wasn't too stressful. The Toy Box Plus was definitely an interesting point I didn't think about, but I can't imagine that was too stressful compared to other demos that they would have made for E3 and the like. Playtonic also ran into issues with Unity. There were roadblocks and issues they had to solve on their own, which they had no prior experience in Unity. In comparison to Banjo-Kazooie, they knew the engine worked for Banjo. That's also an interesting thing. They said it was rough. I believe they said it was rough at first, but got easier as time went on. Whereas in old N64 days, I mean, even in the SNES days, it became common where you would basically have to create your own engine for the game, and it would be reworked and recreated every time. Whereas nowadays they have Unreal, they have Unity, they have these different engines where people, where they don't have to worry about creating their own engine. And that definitely streamlines the process, but it's also something, it's a learning process in and of itself. Because it takes up development time from the... Oh, it definitely does. It definitely does take up some time from the development itself. But I imagine it's probably a drop in the bucket compared to what they would have to make for the E3 or a Gamescom or other major convention demos. Because, I mean, the Toy Box, again, is about testing and understanding the mechanics. They probably had something already built while they were making their own test levels and making sure that everything felt fine. So it was probably just taking that and expanding it a little. But... I don't know. I imagine it is definitely something that does take away resources. It is a valid point. I appreciate you for bringing it up. I just personally don't think it's nearly was as stressful as having to create the demos for E3 and Gamescom and other conventions, PAX and the like. So now moving on to the topic of the games that came around the release of Yooka-Laylee. So leading up to the release of Yooka-Laylee, there was a couple of different competitors, I would say. Again, part of the motivation for creating Yooka-Laylee in the first place is there really wasn't many, if at all, direct competitors to this type of genre, being a 3D platformer, collectathon on top of that. So kind of on the outskirts of barely being a competitor, I would say Paper Mario Color Splash should possibly be it, because I mean, Yooka-Laylee was a throwback to games from when they were younger, from a long time ago, whereas Color Splash kind of has that connection to Paper Mario 64 and TTYD, where it could have a similar kind of feeling of trying to pull you in, hoping that you have a game like how you played when you were younger. Also, Paper Mario Color Splash was a 3D platformer in a way, but that's where, and also the art style, I feel like most people would see Yooka-Laylee as being like a kid-friendly type of game, just like Mario Color Splash. So it would push away and scare away, or first impressions would disinterest a lot of the same people, but I also think first impressions would interest a lot of the same people. So while they're not completely similar, I do think they share enough similarities that I would say that Color Splash could be seen as a competitor to Yooka-Laylee. Again, the reason why, another thing to talk about why I bring up this discussions is that there is only a certain amount of money that we can spend each year on video games. Most individuals will get 1 or 2 games a year. Obviously, there are people who can spend enough money to get 5 or 6 games a year, but some people will only spend money on 1 or 2 games a year. So when you look at the list of games in the year, if you're only spending 1 or 2, even if it's not the exact same genre, it is important to consider how much that's going to impact people's decisions to buy these games. So while Color Splash and Yooka-Laylee aren't completely similar, they do share enough similarities that to the individual who's only going to spend money on 1 or 2 games, I think that could be a huge influence. So another game leading up to the release of Yooka-Laylee that I would consider a competitor would be Owlboy. It is a 2D game, but it is a platformer. It is an explorer. It's a game based on and emphasizes exploration. And I think there is a lot of competition between those two. It had a lot of strong backing. It was an indie game just like Yooka-Laylee was. So I feel like a lot of people who would be interested and know about Yooka-Laylee would possibly know about the existence of Owlboy. We had Breath of the Wild, which is a pretty significant release, being an adventure game that really emphasizes exploration, also being a 3D game, and it added its own dedicated jump button. So by definition, it is a platformer, not really, but it definitely has some similarities between it. And then the other huge competitor leading up to the release of Yooka-Laylee that came out was Hollow Knight, another 2D Metroidvania exploration-based game. Also an indie game. It ticks a lot of the same boxes as Owlboy. It's just got a much more dark type of atmosphere and aesthetic compared to Owlboy and Yooka-Laylee, but definitely there's a lot of overlap. Leading up to the release of Yooka-Laylee, that I would consider not a competitor. Man, what was the last thing we talked about? Banjo-Kazooie Nuts and Bolts, I believe that came out in 2007, if I remember correctly, and now we moved on to Yooka-Laylee in 2017. I remember, I think Nuts and Bolts was, 2008. 2008 was the year of sequels, where so many games came out that were the second in a series. Man, we have just continued down that line. We have definitely in the 10 years seen a lot more sequels, because leading up to the release of Yooka-Laylee, we had Gears of War 4, we had Civilization 6, we did have Titanfall 2, we had Battlefield 1, which was World War 1, but was probably Battlefield 6 at that point. We have Call of Duty Infinite Warfare, which is the 9th Call of Duty. We had Dishonored 2, we had Watch Dogs 2, we had Resident Evil 7, we had Yakuza 0, which I don't even know which entry that is. So Persona 5, Mass Effect Andromeda, so many different sequels. But we did also have some new games that were first entries into the series. Like we had For Honor, we had Neo, we had The Last Guardian, which was kind of a spiritual successor. We did have another entry. We had Pokemon Sun and Moon. We also had Nier Automata, huge game. So there was a lot of very big games that year. A lot of games that got people's attentions and people were talking about. So Yooka-Laylee had a lot to compete with. It was a big year. Breath of the Wild could also very loosely be considered a collectathon, as there's a lot of items, enemies, and photograph. Yeah, I guess it could, in a way, be considered a collectathon. I would see it more as a laundry list of things to do. You're not necessarily collecting. You are taking pictures, but it's not quite the same. But it definitely has that similar drive to want 100% things, for sure. So those were the games that came out before Yooka-Laylee, leading up to the release of Yooka-Laylee. So there was games also that came after Yooka-Laylee, that released afterwards, that would be that are things to consider. So after the release of Yooka-Laylee, we had a couple games that would be considered competitors to Yooka-Laylee. We had Crash Bandicoot in the Insane Trilogy. This is a 3D platformer. This was the remaster of all three of the Crash Bandicoot games. This is huge because Crash Bandicoot is a mascot platformer. Yooka-Laylee is a spiritual successor to Banjo-Kazooie, which was, I think we can consider a mascot platformer. Despite the fact Mario is definitely the mascot for Nintendo, I think Banjo-Kazooie is definitely at that point where it could be considered a mascot release, a mascot platformer. But the Crash Bandicoot Insane Trilogy was also 3 games in one. It wasn't just direct ports, they were HD remakes. So a very big thing to consider, and definitely has a ton of overlap with Yooka-Laylee. The big game that was probably the biggest competitor and the biggest game that Yooka-Laylee had to argue with to try to get people's attention and try to purchase them over the other game, A Hat in Time. Hat in Time was another huge game. This was a Kickstarter game. This one was not a spiritual successor, but was a game that aimed to bring back and revitalize an older type of genre feel, with having a lot of influences from a lot of different older games like Super Mario Sunshine, Paper Mario Thousand Year Door, and stuff like that. So, and Banjo-Kazooie as well. So the big competitor that Yooka-Laylee had to compete with and draw attention from was A Hat in Time, that came out, I believe, 6 months after Yooka-Laylee. And then the other huge game that is definitely a huge competitor because they share a lot of similarities, Super Mario Odyssey, came out 6 months after Yooka-Laylee. Also a 3D platformer, definitely more of a collectathon type of aspect, where instead of it having full-fledged missions or objectives like Banjo-Tooie or Super Mario Sunshine with linear options, Mario Odyssey was basically a collectathon in its entirety, where you're just collecting a ton of moons. You have the purple coins in every single level. Mario Odyssey 3D platformer was a huge direct competitor to Yooka-Laylee. As for after the release of Yooka-Laylee, we still had some more games that came out that were fantastic and huge games that, again, still have to consider when it comes to people can only buy 1 or 2 games a year in most cases. There is Little Nightmares came out. Whoops, scroll too far. We have Prey, which I do plan on playing in the future because that has a very interesting way that they approach storytelling in that game. Friday the 13th, ARMS was launched. We had Splatoon 2. We had Sonic Mania, which I did consider making it a direct competitor, or saying it would be a competitor to Yooka-Laylee, but I think it varies a little bit more from the other games like Owlboy. But Sonic Mania was a huge one. Destiny 2 was launched. Danganronpa V3, one of my favorites. Fortnite was released 6 months after Yooka-Laylee. Kind of crazy. It feels like the game had been around so much longer, but no, 2017. And then also Cuphead. Cuphead, huge indie releases. This was a good year for indies in general. What do we have? We had Cuphead, we had Little Nightmares, we had Yooka-Laylee, we had Hat in Time, we had Owlboy, we had Hollow Knight. 2017 was a good year. Late 2016 to the rest of 2017 was a good year for indie games. No, that's the thing, Andy. It wasn't at first. The Battle Royale was not. It was a game that you purchased. A lot of people don't know this, but when Fortnite launched, it was a game that you purchased. And it was a game where you would go in. It was you could play with up to 4 friends, but it was a game with a story, with mission structure, base objectives, where you would go in and go into the town. Yeah, it was the Save the World mode. The Battle Royale mode was added, I want to say, like 2 or 3 months afterwards. And that was, that just exploded. But yeah, no, when Fortnite originally launched, it was a not a Battle Royale mode. That was kind of added as a thing later. What's up, Levy? Insane, A Hat in Time, Super Mario Odyssey, best examples. Oh yeah, there was, and that is quite a lineup to deal with too. That is a hard game to compete with, a hard lineup of games to compete with. What did I miss? Collected. That's true. There is Korok seeds. I mean, there is definitely. I would just say that I think Breath of the Wild is more in the emphasis on exploration as opposed to collecting. There's definitely things to collect, but I think the satisfaction in Breath of the Wild came from going, what's that over there? I want to see what's on that mountaintop, and then reaching the mountaintop because you can go there. You can go anywhere you see. It's that freedom to explore and go, I want to go there, and you can. I think that's the main thing about Breath of the Wild. There's definitely collecting aspects, but I wouldn't say most people bought Breath of the Wild because they were expecting to collect all the Korok seeds. I don't think that was the main driving force behind it. Remember Mighty Number 9 being compared to Yooka-Laylee as well. Mostly, I think they were the same. Money on Kickstarter, Yooka-Laylee was done faster and looks better. So there definitely was some comparisons between Yooka-Laylee and Mighty Number 9. This is, again, based on games that came out 6 months before and 6 months after the release of Yooka-Laylee. I might have overlooked it, but I don't think that Mighty Number 9 came out within that 6-month window either way of Yooka-Laylee, but there definitely is comparisons between them. There are both Kickstarters. They both are Kickstarter indie games that is supposed to be a revitalization of a certain type of game that hadn't been represented as well as they would have liked. They were spearheaded by the individuals who created and basically were the forerunners of the games they were trying to revitalize. So there's definitely comparisons, but I didn't think to include it. The Save the World concept, I loved. I had a total blast, and I probably would still be playing to this day if I didn't get hacked and had all my shit deleted. Still mad about that. But it was my fault for not putting 2-factor authentication. Oh, yeah. I mean, I listed Breath of the Wild as a direct competitor, as something that is more of a direct competitor than a non-direct competitor to Yooka-Laylee. So we have discussed the games that came out around the release of Yooka-Laylee. So now let's talk about Yooka-Laylee itself, the final end product, what we actually got once the game came out and was released. So we got Yooka-Laylee, and there are a couple different things to address and talk about. But I think the most important thing to talk about with Yooka-Laylee was that it was them making a 3D platforming collectathon in a modern age, because that was what they set out to do, was to, you know, they in their advertising for the game, they called it a rare revival. a play on, revival, playing the word revival, but emphasizing Rareware, their origins for where the genre they were trying to bring back was, and trying to harken back to those times and create games that gave a similar experience. And so they were trying to bring back the 3D platform at Collectathon because it had a lapse in popularity at the time of Yooka-Laylee's launch and announcement. So I looked back, found a very interesting list that had all of 3D platformers that had been released. And there really hadn't been any kind of releases in any kind of 3D platformers for quite some time. There was, again, Yooka-Laylee came out in April 2017. There were a couple attempts at indies making 3D platformers. There was a game called Freeze Me that released in 2015. There was Poi, which released in 2017. But they did not have rousing success. They weren't extremely... they didn't really make any huge waves. There is some examples of some larger companies and more established IPs having created some kind of 3D platformers, like Ratchet & Clank All for One, which was a spin-off series in the Ratchet & Clank IP that came out in 2011. And there was also Sonic Generations that came out in 2011, but that was not full-fledged 3D. That had some 3D segments, but it was a mix between 3D and 2D. Wouldn't even quite call it 2.5D. I guess I kind of could, but it was kind of dipping its toes into 3D, not being a full-on one. And then we did have Ratchet & Clank Remaster in 2016, but that's really all I could see for the most part. The only 3D platformers that had really been coming out and having some kind of significance and doing well were Mario games. You had Super Mario Galaxy that came out in 2010, Super Mario 3D Land, which came out on the 3DS in 2011, and Super Mario 3D World, which came out on the Wii U in 2013. Those were pretty much the only games. Like I said, Freeze Me wasn't overly received well. Poi did okay, but also I think it came out after Yooka-Laylee, if I remember correctly. But it came out right before, I think in the same week of Mario Odyssey. So it got drastically overshadowed. You have Ratchet & Clank All for One, which was a spin-off. I'm not familiar with the Ratchet & Clank series, so I don't know how well that game did or how well it was received, if it was beloved or popular or anything like that. Sonic Generations, they kind of dipped their toes into 3D, but it was mostly 2D with some 2.5D and the occasional 3D. And you do have Ratchet & Clank Remaster, but that wasn't a new game. That was just a remaster of the older series. That wasn't them attempting to bring back 3D platforming to the forefront. That was just a remaster of games that people had played in the past. Besides that, it literally was, for the most part, only Mario. And even then, 3D World came out in 2013, and Mario Galaxy 2 came out in 2010. So 3D platforming was definitely, had a lapse in popularity. No one else was really doing it. It was on life support, and Mario was the only one performing CPR at the time. Though at the same time, due to the Kickstarter aspect, the competitors didn't fully apply. What do you mean they didn't fully apply? You mean as direct competitors to Yooka-Laylee? Oh, it was a little bit more than a year away? That would be why. That's why it didn't come up. Oh, I see what you're talking about. Yeah, that's true. Well, yes and no. You could have donated $5 to Yooka-Laylee just to back it. Most people, if they were backing the game, they would have backed enough to get a copy of the game. But it still, I think, does matter, and it is still something to consider that, most gamers will have a set amount of money that they can spend each year on games. And that it becomes a difficult decision. Which games do they purchase? Which do they spend their money on? And Yooka-Laylee, while it was cheaper, I think a full release was $40, so you probably only need to donate $20 on the Kickstarter in order to get a copy. It's still something to consider, where it is $20 out of, let's say the average $100 budget that they have per year. So definitely something to consider, but not, to the extent of buying a full $60 AAA title release. So, excuse me. When they launched the game on Kickstarter, yeah, Super Lucky's Tale. When did that come out too? I looked that up too, and there was Super Lucky, and then there's Super Lucky's Tale, and then there was like one of them was VR, one of them was not. Then there's the release that was on PC, and there was one on Microsoft. I thought about it too. Which one is that though, Bayman? Because I was very confused. I had no idea that Super Lucky had a VR release originally. I remember looking into that recently, but and then deciding not to list it as a direct competitor because it wasn't within the 6-month release window. But yeah, Super Lucky's Tale is a very much direct competitor to the type of style that was Yooka-Laylee, because it is a 3D platformer. I think it was kind of more similar to Super Mario 3D World, where it's more linear objectives to get through to the end of a level. I've still not played it myself personally. Well, not a direct competitor, Mighty Number 9 is still important to the legacy of Yooka-Laylee because it was a Kickstarter game that was made. That's true. That's actually a good point. I didn't even think about that. That's a very good point. Mighty Number 9 is still important to the legacy of Yooka-Laylee because it was a Kickstarter game that made people very wary of Kickstarter games in general and put a lot of pressure on Yooka-Laylee to perform well. That's true. Because I think Shovel Knight was... I need to create a timeline. I need to go back and look at the timeline of Kickstarter games, because I do know Hollow Knight and Shovel Knight did very well. Hollow Knight came out before Yooka-Laylee, so I think that definitely had a positive association with Kickstarter. I want to say Shovel Knight was one of the original first Kickstarter games, and it did very well. So it kind of had like the positive perception of Kickstarter games in general, that they would always turn out well. And then Yooka-Laylee, or not Yooka-Laylee, Mighty Number 9 was kind of a rude awakening that things could go wrong. So it definitely put more pressure on Yooka-Laylee to fall into the category of Shovel Knight and Hollow Knight as Kickstarter games that ended up coming out and were good. Oh wow, was it that old? Shovel Knight's 2013 or 14? Jesus. I didn't know it was that old. Holy cow. It's crazy. That's right, Fast and Light was also a Kickstarter game. However, that is more of its own unique type of thing. Shovel Knight is directly on nostalgia, being an NES, SNES type of style game. Mighty Number 9 being played off of and piggybacking off of Mega Man. Yooka-Laylee off of Banjo-Kazooie. Hollow Knight, not as much. It's definitely more of a unique type of property, but it is a Metroidvania, and I don't think Metroidvanias have really come back into full swing at that point, so they definitely were pulling off of Metroid a lot more. So Fast and Light was its own completely different thing, where it was a roguelite, but it wasn't pulling off of known IPs and pulling off of nostalgia nearly as much as the other ones were. So I think it's kind of in a separate category. It's still a Kickstarter game that was very successful and very well received, and definitely builds up the reputation of Kickstarter games as tending to be good, but it's not quite in the same category as the other ones, in my opinion. It definitely doesn't set up the same type of expectations, because expectations build up because of what people know about, and the people who will back Yooka-Laylee probably don't know about Fast and Light. People who backed Hollow Knight probably don't know about Fast and Light because they're such different games. So Yooka-Laylee, again, being a 3D platformer, was launched on Kickstarter and advertised as a spiritual successor to Banjo-Kazooie. And because of that, it was a tough sell and a big follow-up that they had to make. It had, what's the word? Big ambitions, big shoes to fill. And one of the issues that they had... Dang, I lost my train of thought. My apologies. Collectathon on page. So I should have double-checked this ahead of time. That's something that shouldn't have been there. Well, that kind of ruined the flow of things. My bad. We'll talk about that more later. But again, going back to the original idea topic of 3D platforming collectathons in a modern age, this was the first time, while there weren't many 3D platformers that were coming out at the time, if you look at that list, none of them, the short list of Freeze Me, Poi, Ratchet & Clank, Sonic Generations, Ratchet & Clank Remaster, Mario Galaxy, Mario 3D Land, 3D World, all of that, they are 3D platformers. They aren't 3D platforming collectathons. There really hadn't been one for about 2 decades. And because of that, they had to make some adjustments having come into a modern, bringing this type of game experience into a modern age. The biggest thing being that worlds could be larger. They have stronger hardware that allow for bigger worlds, and there were some issues and complications that they had to overcome when they got to this point. So spreading out, they said that when they were spreading out their 100 notes, or in this case quills, over the map, they were spread incredibly thin, and that $200 quills were still incredibly thin in this large overworld. In Banjo-Tooie, they had gone from the 100 notes individually to nests of 5. They had to, instead of breaking it down so that they were more in bunches together like they did going from Kazooie to Tooie, going into Yooka-Laylee, they had to actually expand it and double it from going 100 quills to 200 quills because of the size of these levels. Making the worlds larger, obviously more space, bigger space, allows for more potential to add more content. However, it also adds for the issue of the game possibly feeling more empty. And we'll discuss more of that later, that part specifically, but it's definitely a big problem where you create these larger, bigger worlds. Doesn't necessarily make it a big thing, because these larger worlds can feel a lot more empty and isolated and desolate. Because the worlds are larger, they can't place the resource items all over the place. So one of the things in the designs of Banjo-Kazooie was that they had feathers, they had eggs, they had gold feathers, they had 1-ups, they had mumbo tokens, they had all these things scattered all over the place. They had Jinjos as well. And it was basically a reward for individuals to go and look in every nook and cranny, every single spot that you can go to. Because the sizes were of the levels were manageable enough where people could go and explore every single nook and cranny in these games. Because of these levels are now on more powerful hardware, they can make these levels larger. They can't exactly do that. They can't place resources, items all over the place, and so because of that, they had to change how they did their resources entirely. So that is why, part of the reason why we have the inclusion of the stamina meter. And then, of course, because of these large sizes of worlds, entering these levels at full size could be very overwhelming. They had the 5 levels. If you go into all of them and they were at their full size each time, it could be kind of overwhelming to decide where you want to go to first, or which places you have or have not been to as well at all. So because of these larger size worlds, they decided to go with the mechanic of expanding the worlds as well on top of it. So while almost everything about the adjusting 3D platformers to the modern day and age has to tie to the size of the worlds, the tendrils reached down to quite a different places and affected a lot of different things that most people, I think, expected to have in this game, being a spiritual successor to Banjo-Kazooie. So also being a 3D platformer in the modern age, that's kind of that is not kind of, but is directly considered a spiritual successor to Banjo-Kazooie. There's definitely a lot of references to their older games. So Yooka-Laylee was heavily influenced by Banjo-Kazooie and Banjo-Tooie in many decisions that were brought over to Yooka-Laylee. One of them being the characters talking in gibberish, which I found very surprising that a lot of people did not like. I'm not sure if maybe people did not play this growing up and so they went into it and were annoyed by it. I'm not sure if it's something maybe as a kid you are more tolerant of and it doesn't bug you as much. Maybe this is something that people generally as a whole did not like, but because we were in the 90s, there was not direct communication between the players and the devs, so they weren't aware, and I was not aware of how much people had disliked it. But the character speaking in gibberish was something that they did bring back from the original Banjo-Kazooie and Banjo-Tooie games. And one of the benefits to this is it does keep down costs, because when it comes to voice recording for games, it's a very expensive process. It's a long process, and like I said before, video games change constantly. Content gets cut all the time, and things get tweaks all the time. It really is an expensive process, and it can be a stressful process where if, they record all the lines for a certain character, and then 4 months before release of the game, they have to make a certain change, and because of that, an entire section of dialogue that they've recorded with the voice actor is completely useless, and they have to re-record it. It can be stressful to try to get the voice actor schedule to work where they can get everything recorded again. Sometimes they need to be there in person, because a lot of different developers would like to be there for the recording process and speak with them and be like, kind of give them guidance about what their emotion's supposed to be, what their voice is supposed to be sounding like at the time, how it's supposed to lead into it. It's a lot easier to be there in person so they can know for sure, all right, I know in this recording session that we got everything that we needed, as opposed to the voice actor trying to wing it and figure out what they need to do, record it and send it, and then find out if it's good or not. So they have this back and forth where things are constantly being re-recorded over time. It can be a very stressful process. So taking out the whole issue of voice recording with just doing dialogue and doing this way with the gibberish saves a lot of time, a lot of money, and a lot of stress. However, this was not just a decision that they made to keep down costs. It wasn't just a decision to harken back to the older times, but apparently it was an artistic choice. And the Mel Byleth, though, granted, oh yeah, that's right. There's also other issues like that. The whole issue with the Mel Byleth, where there was issues after the game came out, where he was, what is it? He said something that was very bigoted, I believe, or there was other issues, and basically he ended up being a bad person. Nintendo didn't want anything with the game to be associated with him, so they had to go and change the voice lines with the character, and they had to do it last second because the game was basically out at that point. So when it comes to voice acting, it can be very stressful. But as I said, this wasn't just for saving money or reasons or just to harken back to old times. There was actually an artistic choice behind this, and I'm just going to read a quote directly. This was said by, I believe it was Gavin Price, I believe is the individual who said this during an interview. Where did the quote go? Here it is. He said, "I'm a big fan of content that doesn't handhold the player and leaves creative gaps for you to inject some of your own thinking into what's going on and engage with the game on a deeper level. If we were to give them a voice, we would also be closing that door for the player." I never quite understand that. But basically, the idea was giving a general sound for the character helps build an idea of what that character's personality seems like, but leaving their actual voice out allows the player to think of how they sound in their head personally. And I want to go off on a small tangent because I didn't quite grasp this when I initially read this part of the interview, but I had a real-life experience where I was able to tie this to that really put this into perspective and made me understand completely what he was saying. So, small tangent. I think this is kind of a comparison to how anime does. There's the big discussion and debate between the sub version or the dub version of anime. So I watched My Hero Academia, and I watched it with the subtitle version, so it was in Japanese voices, but it had the English subtitles on there. And it allowed me to hear their voices and kind of get a general idea of what their personality was more like, but I still, while reading it, would hear it in my own kind of voice that I created in my head, that I associate with the characters. And then I went to go see the My Hero Academia movie in theaters, and this was the dubbed version. This had the English voice actors, and save for two characters, none of the voices at all matched what I had created in my head. So as I was watching the movie, it was actually taking me out of it because I was watching it and I couldn't even really fully focus on what some of the characters were saying because I had created this idea of what the character sounded like in my head, and it was such a stark contrast and difference to what I had created in my head, and I didn't even realize I had created this different idea for the character in my head, all because of the subtitled versions, where they have a voice clearly because they're speaking in Japanese, but I can't understand what they're saying, so it's mostly just a sound that kind of adds to their personality. And I think it's the same thing with Yooka-Laylee in this case, where they add the sound effect, the gibberish sound effect, where it can kind of give an idea to how the characters sound, and therefore it can lead in a certain direction to building how the personality of the character is tied with the dialogue as well, but it still leaves some to the character, to the player, to add more personality to the character through their voice. Whereas if they had done full voice acting, I think it would have taken away from that experience as a whole. So just kind of a side tangent. Hopefully that can allow you to understand why what Gavin means specifically when he's talking about it was an artistic choice to make it so they went with the gibberish as opposed to full voice acting with the game. I think it's also something you don't see too much anymore in that exact style. Probably. Oh, definitely. So going back to other things that they brought from previous Rare games, that was clearly an influence. Models for collectibles and the heads for when characters were talking were modeled as sprites and then animated on top of it. So instead of making full 3D models for things that you would collect, like quills and things like that, they just made them, or when the characters are talking and the dialogue, they just made them 2D sprites and then animated the movement of them a little bit. Probably save time, but also for the unique aspect and as a callback to the original games. It's definitely a unique style, especially in current days. Every time you pause the game, they have different characters that pop up and appear, and they do their own little gibberish noise when you go across them. Again, small little personality quirk, but definitely something unique that I don't really see in modern games. All collectibles are sentient, and they talk to you when collecting them. A definitely unique way that they explain specifically what they are, and it adds personality where every single thing that you interact with in some shape or form is some kind of sentient being. They did do collectibles everywhere, but they did admit that in Donkey Kong, they admitted that in previous games they might have gone a little too far with collectibles. They don't state a name, but I think we all know what game they're talking about in that case. Combine that with the fact that the levels were extremely large and it was hard to spread out resources properly. I think this is the other half of the formula as to why they went with the stamina meter. It was the size of the levels made it so big that they couldn't make it so that items could be located in places where it was accessible to replenish your resources quickly. It was also them learning their lessons where they felt they went too far with a certain mystery game with how far they went with collectibles, and so it was these two combined that we ended up with the stamina meter that we have in the final version of Yooka-Laylee. They brought back Jinjos in this game, however, they were repurposed into Ghost Rider, so instead of just finding the 5 hidden collectibles that you have to find like you could in Banjo-Kazooie, then there's an extra step where you need to interact with them in some way. One of them's faster, you need to catch them. One of them is hungry, you need to feed them. One of them attacks you, you have to try to retaliate and attack them. And one of them is invisible, and you need to try to make them visible as well. Every time a new Zelda game comes out, my dad always asks why it's never fully voice acted. I think that it was fully voice acted would take away a bit, like I mentioned with My Hero Academia. Absolutely. A lot of people seem to think that a game needs to be fully voice acted, and that's not true, especially for certain games like Zelda, for example. It's just one of those things where Zelda has been around for so long. It was very ballsy for them to do Breath of the Wild where they voice acted Zelda herself, but it was definitely the best decision to not voice act Link, because Link... The Zelda series has existed for 30 plus years at this point. People have played it so much. It is such a wide reach. So many people played it. Everyone has their own different opinions on how Link would sound as a character and how they built him up in his head, that it would just never work. They would never be able to fully create. They would never be able to voice act him in a way that would be satisfying to even, I think, to even majority of the people. I think it's so different. So just because we are in a day and age where technology is better, we have the ability to give full voice acting to everyone, doesn't mean we necessarily should. One of the things that they also added and brought back was transformations in every single level. It definitely adds it adds a unique mechanic to every level, so there definitely is a benefit to it, as opposed to whatever moves that you have in a specific location. You have a new mechanic that's given to you temporarily and allows for options of a new objectives that could be completed that they couldn't be completed otherwise. Something they definitely brought back from the earlier Banjo-Kazooie and Banjo-Tooie Donkey Kong days was a simple story. When creating Playtonic said in an interview that one of the pillars that they have for creating the game is they believe that the philosophy of the story needs to serve the gameplay. Just like how Banjo-Kazooie, Banjo-Tooie, and Donkey Kong 64, the story is very basic and simple. It did add a motivation to what was happening in the game, but it wasn't something that really shaped the way the game really shaped the way the story specifically. And I think that's important for the actual gameplay experience. They're not trying to tell a story, they're trying to create a gameplay experience that has some kind of story around it. And they definitely brought that with Yooka-Laylee. And then lastly, one of the things that they brought back from the earlier games was a bright, happy, colorful art style and aesthetic. And they said that the devs have said that they wanted to create a game that when everything all came together, when a player would look at the game, they would just smile. They would just see the whole cohesive of the font, the characters, the aesthetic, the color choice, the characters, the location, all of it would just come together on screen, and they wanted the players to just look at the game and just smile. And I think they did a fantastic job of that, because God, it just looks like such a happy, fun game. So we talked about some references to the older games, them bringing the 3D platformer Collectathon to the modern age. Let's talk about some of the characters in the game. We talked about the majority of the character discussion we had at the beginning about how the game took shape with the discussion of how Yooka and Laylee came into creation, how they settled on them. So there isn't as much to talk about with the characters, but there is a couple things I want to touch on. One of the other pillars that Playtonics had when creating their studio, and that they will go forward with when creating their games, is that they wanted to create a world of characters you'd see again and again, with potential for them to have, like, they want the characters to be so fleshed out that they have potential to have their own games, essentially, where they could have a bigger role in the next game or the next time that they see them, or eventually to the point where they have their own entire game. Because of this, they created a wide cast of support characters that generally filled a specific role that they had to do. And because they had a wide breadth of characters, they could reuse them in later levels. This could, depending on who you asked, could partially add to the loneliness type of feeling that the large levels had, but the characters design that they end up having were much more fleshed out compared to other games that went for quantity of a lived-in world as opposed to quality of the NPCs that you encounter themselves. I mean, you look at Skyrim, for example, the guards that say the same 3 things every time to the point it became a meme, whereas you encounter the characters in the Yooka-Laylee worlds, you know, there aren't as many characters to encounter, but they definitely have a lot more personality and uniqueness to them and relative to each other on top of that. Story in Yooka-Laylee is interesting. While the first game's plot assembled the universe and franchise building of something interesting, the world building is a lot more focused than Banjo-Kazooie. Absolutely. I think so. When discussing Banjo-Kazooie Nuts and Bolts, we talked about how Nuts and Bolts was them jumping onto more powerful hardware, and this was essentially their first attempt at creating a Banjo-Kazooie universe. Before, it was mostly just the vacuums, the isolated worlds, and the hub, and how they interact with each other, and what was the guiding force to push Banjo forward. So that's why you had Banjo-Kazooie as the main character. You had the separate worlds that still connected to each other, but the hubs were mostly just a connection between the two, and Grunty's sisters being the motivating force for going forward. But Nuts and Bolts was the first time they were able to create a universe, and they tried to go with that, with having Log and having the townspeople, and why the hub for Showdown Town was so fun to explore around. So I think that they're diving into that a little bit more, where they're definitely trying to create a universe that exists in the Yooka-Laylee universe. However, when it comes to the actual gameplay, they're not trying to create a award-winning story. They're trying to create a motivation to keep going forward and something that pushes the gameplay. But I do agree, they are definitely pushing for more of an actual overarching, continuing, living, breathing world and story that goes along with it. I do agree with that. I think a few war points in the world's hubs, like in Tui, would have improved the experience a bit, although flight would make it seem a little less worthwhile. Like for World 2, have a warp at the start, Dr. Puzz at the top benches of the castle would have made traveling easier. I agree. So my personal philosophy, one of my big issues I have with Yooka-Laylee, I genuinely think flying kind of ruins the game. You get it in the last world, you get it really late, but it really just kind of breaks everything. When you know flight is a thing that you can do at any given point once you have flying, it really kind of breaks the shape and build the level. I think it's much better to have specific rooms like they did in Banjo-Kazooie, where you can have the levels that have flying all over the place, like Treasure Trove Cove, but then you also have Clanker's Cavern, where you can't fly all over the place, and you have cases like, I'm trying to think of one. I'm trying to think of an example of a place where you can fly, but like in a specific room. But they could basically limit it to a certain room. For example, like maybe in Yooka-Laylee, they could do a flight pad. So in Glitter Glacier, you can't fly in the main outside area, but you can fly inside the cave, kind of thing. I think it also makes it so you can't have you can't have warp points, because why would you do it? Yes, thank you, Electric. Mad Monster Mansion Church. You can fly inside the church, but you can't fly around the outside of the level. Things like that. So they can restrict it. Click-Clock Wood. I was thinking of Click-Clock Wood too, but I wasn't sure, because I was like, no, the Bumblebee can fly around all of summer. And that's most of the level that you can interact with. But yeah, no, Click-Clock Wood Winter is another good example. I knew there was one in Rusty Bucket Bay. I couldn't remember it. God, it's been a while since I played. Thank you for remembering all this stuff. Yeah, free flight is definitely one of the worst things you can do for a 3D platform. I agree. It was yeah, it's something that if they do Yooka-Laylee, I really do hope they do the Banjo-Kazooie treatment where they make it so you can have access to all your moves at the very beginning again, which is fantastic. I love it. And then on top of it, they give you all your moves except for flight, and they just, in their cheeky sense of humor, they reference go, I think I'm missing something. I don't know. Oh, well. And then they kind of leave, and it becomes a running joke where they keep talking about how they're missing flight. And maybe make it like 100% bonus when the full game is absolutely completed. Then they give back the flight like, oh, this is what I meant to give you. So that you have, it's basically God mode where you get to fly over the entire map when you don't have to worry about it anymore. So I think that, yeah, Yooka-Laylee, they should start it how they did with Banjo-Kazooie, where you have all of your moves, but they don't give back flight, because I really do think it kind of just breaks the game. And then have a warp pad kind of way to travel, warp pad system to travel. So I don't know if I'm going to have a discussion for Impossible Lair. I do love Impossible Lair, though. Fantastic game. So much that they do right. I really don't think the hub gets enough praise, because I think the hub is one of the best parts about that game. The actual levels are fantastic. They're great, but I spent so much time in the hub. But, yeah. Anyway, that's kind of... that would be talking about an entirely different game at this point. Going back to the characters... So we have, we talk about the support characters, but when it comes going back to Yooka and Laylee, the devs have said that they felt that the balancing between Banjo and Kazooie felt weird. In Banjo-Kazooie, Kazooie's the one who's really doing majority of the moves. She's doing the Talon Trot, she's shooting the egg, she's doing the Wonder Wing, she's the one flying, she has the Rat-a-tat Rap, she has the Beak Buster. Banjo punches. That's it. Banjo is basically useless. Despite the fact Kazooie was the one doing the was in default state, despite the fact you see Banjo and Kazooie is the one kind of hiding, it really feels like more than anything else that Banjo is Kazooie's sidekick, and they really wanted to address this and correct this in Yooka-Laylee. So they wanted to have them both out front and center, and they wanted to more evenly distribute the attacks and the moves between the two. And this is also part of the reason why they said they did not choose to split them up, because they wanted to really, really hammer it home that with this game specifically, Yooka and Laylee are both the protagonists. They are both equally important, and they didn't want to split them up. They wanted to make sure wherever one was going, the other was going. So they went together with each other everywhere. So it was definitely a more balanced distribution between the two, where they both feel as effective and they both feel like they're both doing something important. Rework the control moveset early? What do you mean the control and moveset? Oh, entirely. Really? What did you have an issue with in particular? The swimming was very odd, and I wasn't a fan of it at first, but I grew to like it a lot. I mean, they should obviously have the ability to read my controls, but my biggest thing, and God, I really hope this gets through to someone, the ability to invert X and Y axis controls is fantastic. It's great, but please, for the love of God, if you're going to offer the option to invert X and Y axis controls, please have a separate option to invert X and Y axis controls in first-person view. It's very different. It's very, very different. Please allow 4 inverted options, please. Yep, they made both of the characters equally important. It's great. Banjo sleeps in Tooie, and he does get a double jump when he's separate, unintentionally. No, but they definitely did a better job of balancing the characters. And it shows that they had a goal going into the second game, which I believe they plan on doing, but they haven't actually said anything about. That'd be awesome. Alright. So, that's addressing the characters. Let's start talking about the levels. This is the thing that I feel the most strongly on, and I think there's some very unique and interesting attributes to how they approach the level design to it, and why I think it's great in some ways and flawed in the other. In my opinion, the disparity between Banjo's abilities and Kazooie's abilities added to their characters. Kazooie being so powerful led to arrogance and take no shit attitude, while Banjo wasn't as powerful, but the diplomatic ones, so they can actually be helped by friendly characters like Bottles and Mumbo. I think regardless, if they had flipped it, their personalities, I don't think that... how do I put this? I don't think the fact that Kazooie is the one that's more aggressive really was tied to the personality. I think it was just meant to be that they wanted the two opposite to each other, where Banjo is the one who is... more kind-hearted and relaxed and lackadaisical, and Kazooie is the more aggressive one, because those are just two personality quirks that, you know, are opposite each other and blend together. In the early design parts, they had it so that Banjo had a backpack because he was carrying his items. And then they wanted to make it so that he would shoot eggs. So they had the eggs come out of the backpack. And then they wanted to make it run faster. So they had legs come out of the backpack. And they realized that they had so much to do with the backpack that they might as well just add a second character to it. So it was something that was meant to just be a mechanic. And then they added it and turned it into an extra character. I don't think it was necessarily reflective of how much they had an impact on the game. But anyway, yes, I do want to talk about the levels because I think the levels are a very significant discussion point. I have very strong opinions on it, why I think it's great, and I also think it was risky and also bad in certain aspects. So going into levels, Banjo-Kazooie had 9 levels in the entire game, 9 levels plus the hub. Banjo-Tooie had 8 levels plus the hub. Yooka-Laylee has 5 levels. They decided to go with size and quality over quantity. They have 5 levels that start off small and then expand. They basically have 5 small levels that turn into 5 large levels. They obviously did this for a couple reasons. Going with only 5 levels, but 5 full-fledged levels. These levels were pretty big, and going into a level fully expanded could be definitely overwhelming. So making it small and then turning into something bigger definitely feels like it's taking in more sizable chunks. It's more digestible. It also allows segmentation of the game, so it doesn't feel like you're going through 5 levels. When you go into Tribal Stack Tropics, what is wrong with me? And then you play it and you collect everything and then you go back and expand it. It can feel like you're going into a second level. It doesn't feel like you're just playing through 5 levels. It can almost feel like you're playing through 10 levels, or at least more than 5 levels, maybe not full 10. I wouldn't say this is necessarily the equivalent to padding the game, as some people might, but it is definitely an artificial expansion of the size of the game to the player mentally. But that's just, again, that's game design in a nutshell. It's all about taking the content that they have and presenting it and using tricks to make it seem different than what it actually is to the players. So some people can argue that as padding. I genuinely don't think it is, but having the levels expand definitely gives more usage and reason to collect pages. It's not just about unlock levels, but it's also expanding them even more. And the other choice, the other reason why they probably chose 5 levels is because it allows them to take 5 levels and make them large, great levels to expand, as opposed to, SM64, where they have 15 levels, where some people might think that some levels are filler, are much more lackluster, much more bland compared to others, because they have so many levels to go through, so many levels to create. It's definitely a lot harder of a workload, a lot bigger of a workload to create 15 levels than it is to create just 5. Now, talking about this, there's definitely some downsides to this decision of only doing 5 levels. Let's say a player inherently hates one of the levels. That is now roughly 20% of the game that's gone, that the player does not enjoy. If a player always hates ice levels because they don't like the aesthetic, they hate the ice mechanics with it, they hate puzzles that tend to be associated with ice and melting and cold water and everything like that. Just by going into the level, it's an uphill battle to try to convince that player that this is actually a good level, that you will enjoy this, because their thoughts about it, associations with it, automatically put them in a negative mind space when going into it. And again, there's only 5 levels. That's roughly 20% of the game that the player now no longer enjoys. It also creates a limitation on the variety of the type of worlds. With only 5 worlds, they don't run the risk of doing, 2 water-based levels or 2 horror-themed levels. There's no overlap with it, but only 5 levels makes it so that there is definitely a lot less variety than if they had done 9. You look at Banjo-Kazooie and they have the 9 levels. They have, a fun little mountain level, then they have a beach level, then they have a half underwater industrial type of level, then they have a swamp level, and then they have a desert level, and they have a snow level, and then they're all so very different from each other. When you have 9 or 10, you have the opportunity to create a lot more variety in the different types of levels. As you have more levels, you have more chance of overlap, but when you only have 5, there definitely just feels like a lack of variety compared to having 9 or 10 different levels. The other thing is they're doing 5 levels, but it still has to be the full content of a game. In this modern day and age, there are certain standards and certain expectations that come with a game in 2017. they have to create enough content to fill 5 levels to make it feel like it's worth the purchase and worth the time. And basically making sure that these 5 levels have enough content can make it feel like the levels may be lackluster because they may be shoehorning certain things in or forcing other kind of objectives and missions into the game because they're trying to hit that certain goal, not because it necessarily feels like it fits in there. So there definitely is some downsides to doing 5 levels. I think it's just a very risky type of style. If, 5 great levels is definitely better than 10 okay levels, but it's just so much harder to get a better experience out of just 5 levels, in my opinion, compared to 10. My explanation for reworking the entire moveset is a huge wall of text. I don't know if I should post it because it's just 500 characters limit. Maybe I'll wait for the end of stream. You could wait for the end of stream because at the end of stream we do have a discussion where I just ask you guys anything that you want to bring up, so you could definitely do it then. I take questions at the end. Okay. So we've talked about the game, the levels, the character, then bringing it to 3D, the final product of the game. And this is the point where I talk about what about the game was groundbreaking, but there really wasn't anything that was overly groundbreaking in the design of this game because it was meant to be bringing an older genre to the modern age. It's not really much about experimentation or testing or creating something new. It's about taking something that exists in the past, bringing it to current times, and finding out what's right and what's wrong about it. What they need to tweak if they want to continue to bring the genre to the modern times. So it's not really groundbreaking. It's definitely groundbreaking in the sense that they're one of the first games to bring a 3D collectathon platformer to modern times. But other than that, not too much about it is groundbreaking. It's just them taking a passion project and seeing if it aged well and if it can be brought into current day and age gaming. And because of that, it's also not as much influential as well either. Because it is heavily based off of previously made games, and those previously made games are definitely influential, but it definitely doesn't seem fair to call the Yooka-Laylee influential in itself. Influential doesn't feel like the right word because there is definitely lessons to be learned about Yooka-Laylee. There's a lot of important things we can look at and learn from it, but I just don't think influential is the correct word for talking about this type of game. So normally this is where I'd be done talking about the final product of Yooka-Laylee, but I do want to deviate a little bit and bring something up because, like I said before, the biggest direct competitor between Yooka-Laylee for Yooka-Laylee, in my opinion, was Hat in Time. These were both games that were Kickstarter projects. They were both promising to bring back an older style of game that hadn't been around for a while that people had highly been demanding for. Yooka-Laylee, the 3D collectathon platformer based on Banjo-Kazooie, Banjo-Tooie, and Donkey Kong 64, whereas Hat in Time was a combination of also Banjo-Kazooie, but more so Super Mario Sunshine and parts of TTYD combining into one. However, for some reason, Hat in Time was so much more universally approved and loved by people, whereas Yooka-Laylee was very, very mixed, and I still can't quite understand why that is. I can understand, obviously, there's just a matter of preference. They are similar types of games, but they do have some kind of differences between the two of them. But it still is very odd to me why Yooka-Laylee had such a mixed response, whereas Hat in Time was almost universally praised. So I asked some questions on stream, and I gathered some information and talked with some people, and I do think it is important to bring up the comparisons between the two of them. A comparison between the two of them to try to figure out why it was that Yooka-Laylee was mixed, whereas Hat in Time was very well loved, and hopefully that we can learn some lessons from that for future games. So Hat in Time was released in October of 2017, just 6 months afterwards, and I have my thoughts about Hat in Time versus Yooka-Laylee. I don't know if you want the now discussion. This is going to be a very brief, pretty brief, so we'll go through my points real quick, and then if you have your own opinions, I definitely want chat's opinion on why they either like Yooka-Laylee more or liked Hat in Time more, or why they were mixed on Hat in Time, why they were mixed on Yooka-Laylee. But this shouldn't be incredibly long. It's kind of a brief tangent. But something that I got from people is that Hat in Time, basically the progression system felt different, whereas Hat in Time, it was a much more clear progression system. It's much more obvious when you have made progression through a level. Missions have clear begin points, they have clear end points. It's very obvious when you've done what your objective needs to be when it is completed. You are physically picking the missions that you want to do, and every time that you complete a mission, it shows visibly when you are fully complete with an area or level. Whereas Yooka-Laylee, every time a page is obtained, it is progress, but it feels so much smaller because it is much smaller compared to timepieces. Pages require a lot less time and work to get, but that also makes feeling like collecting them feels more significant compared to timepieces. And in Yooka-Laylee, you have 25 pages and 200 quills per level. So collecting all these things is a much smaller and much slower progression point to get to full completion, as opposed to Hat in Time, which has 5 or 6 main objectives to complete in each world. Completing a mission or completing a level in Yooka-Laylee almost feels like it kind of comes out of nowhere for some people, where because it's a slow incremental build and you don't really know when you go to look at your totals, you have no idea really knowing where you're at. Some people can feel like they're so far along in progress because they've been going around so much and collecting so much, but because there is 225 objectives to collect, I think it's closer to actually 235 if you include the Ghost Riders and the Molly Cool and the Rextra coin, everything like that. The number definitely climbs up quite a bit compared to Hat in Time, which has, in order to fully complete it, you really only need to complete, 7, 8, 9 things per level. The incrementation is a lot slower in Yooka-Laylee, that people tend to forget about it, whereas it's repeated to you as you increment and get more completed done in Hat in Time, that it feels like you're actually making more visible, tangible progress. So the progression system definitely feels different in Hat in Time compared to Yooka-Laylee. That's also part of their different designs entirely. Hat in Time is, the Super Mario Sunshine aspect, where it is a given message, a given mission with a linear path to the goal. Yooka-Laylee is a giant open world where you can explore everything and collect everything at your own points. So one, having the linearity makes it so it's a lot more obvious when you are progressing, whereas one being an open world that's not linear has that downside where it doesn't feel like you're making progress as clear or obvious. And then the other thing that I seem to gather from people is that the world population felt different. When a Hat in Time, there are definitely much more repetitive characters. The characters definitely feel, you have copy-pasted characters from most worlds. You go into a world and you go to Mafia Town, there's Mafia everywhere, but they're literally the exact same Mafia, copy and pasted all over the place. But because there are more characters, they tend to feel more lived in. And because there are more characters, it feels less isolated and it feels more alive and like it's a living, breathing type of world. The games aren't focused on exploration. They are, again, more linear paths. So it makes it easier for the devs to curate these levels and put creatures and what to populate the levels in a way that makes them feel more alive. Compared to Yooka-Laylee, which has a much more expanded open world that is about exploration. You're not exactly expected to find people all over the place because it's about exploration. There isn't really central focal points as a result of that. Also a very important thing about this is the atmosphere of the game. Hat in Time is about a little kid who is going all over the place because she's trying to recover her missing timepieces. She just happens to stumble into locations, and being a mischievous little shithead kid, she kind of creates some enemies along the way. Whereas Yooka-Laylee, you are venturing into enemy territory. You are going to locations where you have an organization that's following you and actively hunting you down and trying to stop you. So while in Hat in Time, you're just exploring and going from town to town, you are likely to enter into a pocket of a world that naturally exists and is already there, and you have the chance to encounter more neutral AI who aren't going to be actively trying to go after you and therefore can feel more alive and real and lived in. Yooka-Laylee, most of the characters you encounter are going to be these new types of enemies because you have a bad organization that's chasing after you and trying to shut you down and trying to kill you. So again, the emphasis on linear allows them to create a world that feels more alive and natural and organic, as opposed to Yooka-Laylee, which is more open exploration, wide open world. You can go where you want to, that they can't exactly curate that experience to make it feel like it's more alive. Again, also based on the settings of the world, it adds into that as well. So these are major differences that people had between the two of them, and can be argued as why maybe 3D platformers don't do as well in modern times. But it also, I think, by acknowledging and recognizing and isolating these issues, then we can try and find a way to overcome these obstacles. It definitely would be harder to make a world feel more alive and lived in and organic in an open world like Yooka-Laylee, because they are so spread out. It's kind of hard to make it so that you can explore these worlds while encountering people that feel alive but not get intrusive or get in the way. But as long as it is addressed and isolated, it is something that can be worked on towards. Hi, Andre. How are you doing? Thank you for the 39 months. I'm doing good. All right, so that was the main things I could gather about why people seem to have more of a positive reception to Hat in Time compared to Yooka-Laylee. There's obviously different things. I think Hat Kid's so adorable and so cute, and I'm not a huge fan of chameleons or bats, so I don't really like it. There's just a lot of opinionated stuff, but when it comes from a game design aspect, I think it's those were the main things I could find that I can pin down to be specific reasons why people tend to enjoy Hat in Time over Yooka-Laylee, that can be tweaked and changed as opposed to just matter of preference or personal opinion. All right, Electric, let's see what you have to say. My thoughts are basically that the crux of the most of Yooka-Laylee's issues comes from the fact that I think it needed 6 months to a year more time in the oven. I think Playtonic felt pressure for the Kickstarter to release what they had. After all, they had already pushed back the game once or maybe twice, and people were getting antsy. Meanwhile, Hat in Time had been in development for far longer. Its Kickstarter campaign was in like 2013. Yep. This allowed Hat in Time to be much more polished on release, while Yooka-Laylee needed a few patch fixes right after launch. And that contributed to the sour taste some people had in the game. The first impression couldn't be overlooked by many. It all comes back to Kickstarter's unique attribute of letting the public know about a Kickstarter. It's, yep. While most other games only get unveiled to the public after a year or two of work, so they only need to wait a couple more years for a finished product. While for Kickstarter games, 2 years is usually not enough time for a good polish and finished product. But after 2 years since knowing that the start of the project, the public starts to get antsy. Yep, Playtonic being made up of original devs, people have their high expectations for them. Yep. That's what I said before, is that it seems that the Hat in Time devs were much more willing to keep information or keep the supporters in the dark if it meant the final product was good, whereas the devs at Playtonic seem to want to keep the backers in the loop about the progress of the game. But I think that also ultimately harmed the game, because as we discussed, without certain context for certain things that were added during the development of the game, it definitely looks bad, and they could be pressured to try to remove it or tweak it or change it, and that definitely can change the end result of the game, because backers and the majority of people who play games know nothing about game development or what is actually good. You know, a lot of people think they know what they want, but they don't really know what they want because they don't know how to put it into words. It's definitely a case of Hat in Time disappeared for a while, and I think they were able to work on actually getting a fully finished game, as opposed to Playtonic did the thing where they tried to be upfront and let people see it. I agree. I do think that definitely hurt it. That's interesting. Hat in Time was my game of the year in 2017, but the more I started to play through, the more issues I find in its design. I end up so much more frustrated towards Hat in Time. Yooka-Laylee ended up being the game I prefer. I also discovered the development history of a Hat in Time, which is really, I did not know that, Brian. I'm interested. Yeah, as someone like, again, I really enjoyed Hat in Time. I really did, but I definitely felt like I enjoyed Yooka-Laylee more. I mean, the things that I talked about, I felt like the worlds were bland, I guess, because of the characters being repeated over and over. It's just Hat Kid. She is that protagonist that's just a ditzy little kid. She's just a little shithead, but there's not much to her. There's not much of her connections to the other world. She's just kind of a kid who drops in, grabs her shit, and goes. I don't know. I enjoyed Hat in Time, but I definitely don't look back on it as fondly as much as Yooka-Laylee. And there definitely was that fact that I had the excitement for it being a spiritual successor to Banjo, but for some reason I can't quite place it. Something about it, I definitely did enjoy Yooka-Laylee more than Hat in Time, and maybe I should do another playthrough of Hat in Time to see if I can isolate what I like more about it. Biggest evidence toward my thoughts, I think, is Impossible Lair, since it wasn't a Kickstarter game. Yep. So again, I've said this before on stream, but I guess I'll say in the video. My theory about Yooka-Laylee, the big difference between Yooka-Laylee and Impossible Lair is that I think Yooka-Laylee was their first time trying to jump into creating a full 3D game, just a full game on their own with full creative control. I think it was a flex of the muscles on doing a genre that they hadn't done in a while, and it was definitely them getting back into the swing of things. And once they had Yooka-Laylee, the Impossible Lair, where they were able to do what they wanted again, but they also had done some testing and some practicing with Yooka-Laylee, it was a much more polished game. I think that now that they've kind of warmed up a little bit, I'm believing that their games are going to be a lot better. All right, not painted. Ooh. Interesting. I did not know that, Bryman. Huh. Now, I'm wondering what they mean by underpay the devs, because, I mean, working on a game for 6 years, money does run out eventually. Was he holding the money for himself so he was living totally fine, or did they run out of money? I'm curious. Now I want to look that up. All right. So, that is Yooka-Laylee, the final product. I'm going to take a short break, because I've been talking for a while. I'm going to get some tea. And we're going to come back, and we're going to talk about the reception. The next thing we'll talk about is the reception of Yooka-Laylee, the critical reception, the public reception, and then we'll move on to what we can talk about, or what the industry can learn about Yooka-Laylee. And then we're also going to close up afterwards with my discussion where I talk about basically the questions that I had for the Playtonic devs. So if they do end up coming across the video, hopefully they'd be willing to answer. And then obviously I'll give some heads up on what we're planning on doing in the future for future discussion. So we're going to take a short break, back in like 10 minutes. So if you need to get a drink, if you need to go to the bathroom or anything, now would be the time to do it. We will be back in a little bit. Yeah, a talk about Hat in Time might be a good idea. I might do that. Did you guys hear Tiny at all screaming from the other room? Or did that not get picked up by the mic? Oh, you didn't? She's on a Rainbow Ride, and she was at like 70 coins, and she tried to wall jump all the way to the top to get to the blue coins, and like 2 of them disappeared before she can get them in time, because she ended up like ledge grabbing the edge of the top, and instead of like hopping up there, so we had to slow climb up. Yeah. That's just system more than I thought possible. Oh, it's not that bad. All right. Excuse me, sorry. Hello. All right. Welcome back. I hope you enjoyed your break. We're going to be heading in now to the next part of the discussion, where we will be talking about the reception of Yooka-Laylee. The fan reception, the critical reception, all the receptions, the TV reception, the receptionist at the desk, everything that has to do with reception with this game. But before we move on, if anyone has any topics, anything that they want to bring up about Yooka-Laylee before we move on to reception, now would be the time to do it. We still, of course, will be having the Q&A session at the end, so if there's anything that you want to talk about that we haven't discussed previously so far, hold it until then. But if there's anything you want to talk about, the final product of Yooka-Laylee, or the comparison of Yooka-Laylee to Hat in Time, speak now or forever hold your peace. And by forever, I mean until the end of the discussion, which we will have at that point. Of course, the wedding reception. How could I forget that? Right. So, going on to the reception, we could talk about review scores. So, something important that I think I should mention when it comes to review scores, obviously the reception about games, there's, no simple, easy way to quantify this. It's a matter of preference, and it's kind of hard to quantify this in a way that we can measure it compared to other games. I think the best way to simplify in this case is with number scores. So I do use Metacritic. An important thing to know with Metacritic is that reviews that don't give a strict number score, whether they give a letter score, they don't actually give a score at all, whether they say something vague like, I liked it or I enjoyed it. What Metacritic does is it takes that review, looks over it, and does their best to turn it into a number score. And then for the purposes of Metacritic, where they aggregate the scores, they then throw that into that number into the mix, and then they get the number from there. Normally, this is not an issue for an older games because it was very common to just always give the number score. The new trend of doing no number score whatsoever, just a general idea, is a more modern thing. And this is Yooka-Laylee, I believe, is the first game where we have this potential quote-unquote issue where people, where the numbers might not be completely accurate, but still going with Metacritic scores to get the general reception to it. So, anyway, review scores. Reception was very mixed with the user reception. The user reception kind of dipping a bit lower than what the critics gave it. Critics were a little bit more positive. The players tended to be a little bit more negative. So, Metacritic score. The professional reviewer score averaged to 72 across all platforms. The highest score was a 75 on the Switch, and the lowest score was the PlayStation $, which I believe I meant to put PlayStation 4 and not PlayStation $. The lowest score was at 68 on PlayStation 4. When it came to the user review score, the number averaged out to 6.5, with the highest score being on the Switch again at 7.5, and the lowest score was a 5.6. I forgot to put what platform. I'm wondering if it was also PlayStation or if it was a different platform. But something I think that is important to, there's something very, very important we can take from this. The highest scores, both by critical reviewers and by user scores, by a very large margin. The Switch had the highest number. Highest score on Switch for users was 7.5. The lowest score for user was 5.6. That's almost a full count of 2. That's 1.9 difference. Whereas the critics score was 75 highest on Switch and 68 lowest on PlayStation 4. That's not as big of a difference, but it is 7. I think it is very important for people to realize that reception to game is definitely based on the player base, the platform, what people tend to play. Definitely people on Switch are more prone to playing games like Yooka-Laylee, where they have more of a cartoony art style, more of a family-friendly, kid-centric type of focus and atmosphere, as opposed to Xbox and PlayStation, which tends to have a player base that skews a little bit older, where they tend to prefer more mature themes compared to stuff like this. So I do think that is something very important to take away from this. And I think it's also why there is more of a bigger disparity in the user scores compared to the critic scores, because the user scores, the critic scores tend to be a little bit more professional. They try to be accurate. They actively try to be unbiased about this. So the difference in skew was only 7, whereas the user score was a difference of 19. So that is also something to consider. True, Electric. The Switch version did come out a lot later than the Xbox version and the PlayStation version. So they were able to tweak a couple things. They were able to make it so that the pause menu had music in it when it originally didn't. They added the option to skip cutscenes, which was not available in the original. They changed 1 or 2 minor inconsistencies with certain glass panes that could be broken and things like that. So that is very true. That is another thing to consider, that the Switch version was a later version and therefore they could patch a couple things out of it. But I definitely think there is more. I think there is a huge significance to the platform that it's on, specifically having a certain type of audience, and what people tend to play on there definitely affects their opinion drastically. Reasons for removing letters and numbers did make sense. Strongly counter ethics pay to play questions. Wait. How is it? Wait. Reasons for removing letters and numbers did make sense. Strongly a counter to ethics pay to play questions? What do you mean? I'm assuming you're talking about reviews, how they've gone from doing number scores to letter scores, or to no full actual number tied to it. But I'm curious what you mean by it's a strong counter to ethics and pay to play questions. Are you talking about the whole thing about reviewers being paid off? Where reviewers give higher scores if they're paid by the developer or the publisher? I have a counterpoint to that, if that's the case. But again, this kind of the issue with this whole discussion format on Twitch is if people are on mobile, they have 15 seconds delay, and even if they're not on mobile, if they're on desktop, they still have to type up their answer. So I'll move on to the next subject, and I will get back to your response when you get to it, Andy. When it comes to the public reception of the game, response to this game was very, very polarizing. People were either very happy with the game or horribly disappointed. It's been kind of frustrating to try to pinpoint why most people felt let down about the game, because they really tended to give vague or unspecific answers. There definitely were cases of consistent issues and complaints, like the camera. There are certain times where the game would crash upon the completion of retro games. There are definitely examples that are consistently reported and are totally understandable. But most of the reasons why people like, I looked on Metacritic, I looked on Steam, I looked on different platforms to what people were giving back for answers to why they dislike the game. And most of the reasons that people gave for disliking the game were they said it was uninspired or not as memorable as Banjo-Kazooie, or objectives are too simple. And I think, honestly, the biggest issue that Yooka-Laylee suffers from is I think it has Pokemon syndrome. So, people remember fondly the older games because they were accessible to kids, and Yooka-Laylee is too. The problem is, now that we're adults, we're able to complete some of these challenges easily, and it seems really trivial and boring. A lot of people look back at older Pokemon games and go, oh, they were so much harder back then. Things have gotten too easy now. And there's definitely is argument that they have made things easier. But like, for example, the example that people like to go to in Pokemon, again, kind of going off another tangent, but example people like to refer to in Pokemon as Pokemon being much harder in the olden days is Whitney and her Miltank. Important thing to know, in those days, this was Generation 2, where they have a much more limited move set. There are not nearly as many moves in the move pool as there is now in current days. There weren't things like abilities. There weren't things like hold items. There were only 250 Pokemon. So the available Pokemon you have up until that point is much more limited compared to what you had in Heart Gold, Soul Silver, where you had a lot more moves, where you had hold items, where you had abilities, where you had 493 Pokemon to choose from, where they could scatter and put in different locations. If you look at Pokemon Gold, the original one, up until that point, the only things that were really direct counters to Miltank were either Ghastly or Geodude. A lot of people tended to skip on Geodude because he encountered in the first game all over the place, kind of had like a Zubat syndrome where most people didn't want to see him. There was also new generation Pokemon, so they wanted to do something different. They wanted to do a new Pokemon, so they wouldn't use him. The other option is Ghastly, which is very easy to overlook because he's only accessible in location, and he is also during the nighttime. So you have like two examples as to how to counter it, but if you overlook these, it's a very difficult battle. Now, and it's also just as a kid, you don't know as much about different move sets and different builds and blah 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 blah. Same thing nowadays, because you look back on it and it's so much harder, but that's because it was a much more bare bones, simplistic type of game design. And when you compare it to now, you definitely have different expectations. One, because gaming has advanced quite a bit, but also because you're older, you're smarter, you're able to see through things. You look at the objectives in Yooka-Laylee and people go, oh, it's so simple, it's so easy. When you look at the objectives in Banjo-Kazooie, there are two objectives where you have to spell out the word Banjo-Kazooie with very bare minimum kind of anything getting in your way. There's so many super easy, simple objectives you have to do in Banjo-Kazooie, but because you were a kid, you develop these positive associations with it and these positive memories associated with it that you can look back on and overlook the oversimplicity and the very easy parts about it that Yooka-Laylee has as well. But just now that you're approaching it as an adult, it seems so trivial and easy because it's the same type of game design where it's focused on something that can appeal to adults but is accessible to kids. I think Yooka-Laylee has that same issue, in my opinion. I think it is it's Pokemon issue. They grew up with it and they really loved it because they were at the perfect time to play it, and they can look back on it and still enjoy it because they associate with the good memories. But when something new is introduced about it, it's inherently negative thought of because it is something that's still appealing to the same audience that you were when it first came out. It's kind of an unwinnable kind of situation. Hi, Siegel. Also, I think I mentioned this during the playthrough proper, but one bug I experienced in launch was a glitch when turning in enough tokens in Capital Casino. Yes. That's, again, a huge bug and a very valid complaint, a bug that makes it so you cannot get your babies. You were the only one I had heard about that, though. But yes, there are definitely, when it comes to bugs and glitches, that is absolutely fair and totally fine to have a negative assumption with it. But it was just kind of frustrating for me was that I looked for other people's reviews and who gave it negative reviews or mixed reviews or middling reviews, and I couldn't find anything. Everyone, it's a skill you have to harness to be able to pinpoint specifically why you dislike something and isolate it and explain it to people. So I wouldn't expect everyone to do it, but based on what I can gather, the majority of reasons why people said they disliked Yooka-Laylee is because they said things about it being uninspired or not as memorable or objective too simple. And the thing that these all have in common is they're basically comparing it to Banjo-Kazooie in very arbitrary, immeasurable ways, and they basically tie it down to I tie it to nostalgia. I think it really is just a case of You played it as a kid. It was the perfect time to play it. It's ingrained in your memory, and you're expecting to have that same experience you had as a kid, but you can't because you're an adult. I think that's the big thing. And they did set themselves up for this type of experience because they advertised it as a spiritual successor to Banjo-Kazooie. They expected, I think a lot of people expected Yooka-Laylee to evolve with how the players did as well, how they got older. They expect Yooka-Laylee to evolve and expand and change in the same way. Exactly, Levy. So I think it's just one of those things where there was no winning it, and we're gonna, yes, Siegel. This game was made by Playtonic, which is a independent studio that was founded by a group of former Rareware devs, and they have roped in together a lot of, I think out of the 25 or so people who work there, I want to say 18 to them, about 18 of them are individuals who worked at Rareware. Yo, crew, thank you for the raid. I appreciate it. We are almost done with the discussion. We're going to be talking a little bit more. So we just finished talking about the public reception to the game. We can now talk about the sales of the game and the sequel. So the game sales for Kickstarter games are a little bit odd to track and balance. This is also most of the games we discussed in the past, we were able to get more concrete numbers because games were more readily tracked. You didn't have the digital market. Everything was physical. So companies like GameStop and Walmart and everyone, they would more publicly track and track the numbers of sales for games, and it was more public information. Now, this is the first game that we've had in a digital era. I mean, we had Banjo-Kazooie Nuts and Bolts, which was a digital era, but not nearly fully digital like it was to this extent. Yooka-Laylee, released 3 years ago, was in the high rise of the digital era, so we don't really have a whole lot of information to know what the sales of the game were like. On top of the fact it was a Kickstarter. Kickstarter is a whole other mess because you had 70,003 people that backed it. We got to assume that like 50,000 of those people got a free copy of the game because of they backed enough money to get a free copy of it. But as of November 24th, 2018, we do know the game has sold at least 1 million copies, which is quite a huge success for an indie game. Another really interesting thing to note is that the sales of the Switch copies rapidly caught up to the sales of the Xbox and the PlayStation 4 copy, even though it came out 7 months after the Xbox and PlayStation version. And it came out only 2 months before Odyssey. Again, Odyssey being one of the direct competitors we listed earlier in comparison to Yooka-Laylee because of the similarities in gameplay, and most gamers only having a set amount of money each year to purchase games, usually around 2 games a year. The game came out 2 months before Odyssey, 7 months after Xbox and PlayStation, and the numbers rapidly caught up to the sales of the Xbox and PlayStation 1, leading in further to the discussion we talked about before, where the reception to the Switch version was almost 20 points higher than the PlayStation or Xbox version. So, again, platform is important, man. Platform is huge. Platform is very, very big. Hello to anyone who just recently came into the channel from Crew's channel. I do appreciate this work group. We're having a discussion where we talk about Yooka-Laylee, the impact it had on gaming, what the industry can learn from it, talk about the history of the IP, the history of the development of the game, what games were coming out around the release of Yooka-Laylee, so we can kind of get a feel for what the industry, what the consumer market was looking for at the time, and things like that. So it's been a fun discussion. We probably got like another 30 minutes left if I had to guess. Yeah, that they've already confirmed that's not going to be a thing, Yoshi. Unfortunately, they had to drop that. So, sales for Yooka-Laylee were very, very good. They reached over 1 million copies in November of 2018. So we're now approaching November of 2020. Numbers probably still gone up from there. I'm not saying it's necessary to reach 2 million, but pretty good rousing success. I mean, the company's still around, and they said that the success of Yooka-Laylee has allowed them to continue making their future games, and that's a perfect transition to talk about the sequel. So Yooka-Laylee and the Impossible Lair was the next game in the IP series that came out October 8th, 2019. And this was a 2.5D platformer that's more comparable to Donkey Kong Country, but it was not a spiritual successor. They were very adamant about it this time. It was not a spiritual successor. This game was received much more consistently and positively by fans and critics alike compared to the first game. Since then, we haven't really heard anything about Yooka-Laylee at the time being. We do know Playtonic is working on a new game right now, but we're still kind of let in the dark. Nope, that never revealed anything electric. but they definitely learned some lessons from the release of Yooka-Laylee, because Impossible Lair had much more positive reviews and was such a good game. And definitely had some more groundbreaking things, like the hub is one of the probably my favorite hub I've ever explored in a video game. Was the hub of Yooka-Laylee and Impossible Lair. I think the way that they handled the difficulty in that game is how every game should handle difficulty. Honestly, I think it's great. I shouldn't say every. Obviously, no game is perfect, but I think every game should consider how Yooka-Laylee and the Impossible Lair approach difficulty with tonics, because I think it's such a fantastic system. But no, they've come out and said that they unfortunately had to cancel whatever the idea was behind it. All right. So that is the reception of Yooka-Laylee. Now we can move on over to oops. Now we can talk about what the industry can learn from Yooka-Laylee. The game definitely made some waves when it was first announced. It definitely had a lot of attention. It had a lot of success, but also had quite a bit of backlash. And there's a lot we can learn from the release of this game. I think one of the most important things that can be learned from the release of Yooka-Laylee is setting reasonable expectations for a game. Building up Yooka-Laylee as a spiritual successor to Banjo-Kazooie from its inception, from its first announcement to the world, probably hurt it. It could have helped it as well, but I definitely Banjo-Kazooie is a universally praised game by critics and players alike. Saying that the game will stand shoulder to shoulder with the game, saying that Yooka-Laylee will stand shoulder to shoulder with Banjo is setting extremely high expectations. It's also comparing a game coming out with people's childhoods and nostalgia. Banjo-Kazooie was a fantastic game. It was a great game. I'm not just saying that because of nostalgia purposes I grew up it. It is objectively a fantastic game. But nostalgia will make it seem even better, and you just can't compete with nostalgia. You just can't. So setting up Yooka-Laylee as being a game that's on the same pedestal as Banjo-Kazooie is difficult in general, but when you have to compete with people's fondest memories of having it and playing it as a kid, it's going to elevate it to an even higher platform for sure. And it definitely hurt it. Following this is definitely a lesson learned from the game, and I want to follow up and say that the devs did learn this lesson specifically. When they did Yooka-Laylee and the Impossible Lair, it is clearly very similar to Donkey Kong Tropical Freeze. It has very similar aspects. It is a 2D platformer akin to how the Donkey Kong Country games are. However, Gavin Price, the studio head for Playtonic Games, has said in an interview, "We are never going to say spiritual successor for any of our games ever again." They said it worked great for marketing, but it had negative drawbacks. I'm sure we can assume and gather what those negative drawbacks were, but that they need to stand on their own 2 feet as a developer. As said, they also said that there are more practical reasons for not using a spiritual successor besides just the negative association and the build up for a game advertised as one. Yooka-Laylee, the Impossible Lair is clearly very similar to Donkey Kong Tropical Freeze, and they were made by the same people. Sorry, not Tropical Freeze itself, but Tropical Freeze is heavily based off Donkey Kong Country, and the devs who made the Impossible Lair are the same people who made the Donkey Kong Country games. They are probably, the Impossible Lair is probably just as similar to Tropical Freeze as Yooka-Laylee is compared to Banjo-Kazooie. So it's understood why they could be compared, but Gavin Price said that comparing the projects and the resources, Tropical Freeze's cinematic budget is probably matches what they had for the entire game of Tropical Freeze. And so comparing the two of them just isn't fair. Also, it's not really accurate to call a spiritual successor just in general because the series still is not dead and it's still going. But they have learned from their mistakes and they are no longer using the spiritual successor moniker. But setting reasonable expectations for players is definitely a huge lesson that developers can learn. I think the game would have absolutely gotten all the funding it needed if it didn't say it was a spiritual successor to Banjo-Kazooie, but it definitely wouldn't have gotten as much. Been a cool way to announce Impossible Lair. Would have been really cool. If it being a successor Banjo was a marketing point or without... No, it was a marketing point. They specifically said in the Kickstarter. In the announcement Kickstarter for Yooka-Laylee, they refer to it as a spiritual successor to Banjo-Kazooie. Another lesson that can be learned from Yooka-Laylee is that taking a genre into modern times isn't so simple sometimes. A game or genre's disappearance from the spotlight sometimes happens for a reason. Some genres don't age well or don't really adapt fantastic to new gaming climates. There can be new understandings in game development, or there could be better hardware and things like that. And so older genres can kind of become outdated. It's why point-and-click adventures, for the most part, have died out. The idea around point-and-click adventures where a very obtuse combination of items and clicking, pixel clicking and pixel hunting throughout games, and it just kind of becomes, in the modern day setting, is definitely a lot more frustrating than it is fun or engaging. So sometimes bringing a genre to modern times just doesn't work. The other thing is distance always makes the heart grow fonder. On top of competing with nostalgia that people have for their older games, a type of game not existing for a while makes people desire for the game to come back become even stronger. And because some people have wanted them, their expectations of someone doing that game becomes very high when announced. So, you have a 3D platformer, Collectathon, that hasn't existed for some time. So people want it, people have a desire for it, people are excited. And then once a game becomes announced where it's in the works, people get excited. But when they see the association of it's the original person who made them, it definitely ties to the nostalgia of the older games. And just like they're competing with nostalgia again. And the distance and not having the game around for a while makes people desire and want it more, that they get excited and more amped up for it in the first place. So it just kind of becomes a thing that stacks on top of the other. So taking a genre to modern times has its issues and definitely can be more difficult sometimes. And then the other lesson I think that can be learned from Yooka-Laylee is that making a game bigger isn't necessarily better, and stronger hardware shouldn't always lead to larger worlds. We're in a growing world of sandboxes. I'm sure you guys are aware that every game seems to be a sandbox nowadays, but people are tired of getting bigger worlds that are empty. People want more content, not exactly larger worlds. And I think again, that's one of the drawbacks that Yooka-Laylee had, was having these large, expansive worlds to explore, and it being an exploration game, it seems like a natural change to the genre and the game that they bring it to stronger hardware that can handle bigger worlds. Obviously, a game about exploration, you make the worlds bigger, but it's still not just about the exploration, it's about the world itself. And you definitely want to take advantage of the stronger hardware to make these bigger worlds, but it's also about making sure they're the right size, not just about bigger is always better. It's about making sure the content inside these worlds is worthwhile. A huge, large world with nothing in it really doesn't have any, doesn't really give people any reason to ever want to explore them. Okay. So that's pretty much all I had marked for the discussion of Yooka-Laylee. That's all the info I've got. The last thing I want to do is, I said I would put this at the end of the video. I sent an email to Playtonic originally, asked them some questions about the development of Yooka-Laylee. They didn't get back to me, which is fine. It's not like I'm an established individual that they would have rushed to answer the questions to. We are also in the middle of a pandemic with COVID, so things are probably very different right now. They're probably working from home. And I might have sent it to the incorrect email. There was a couple different emails to send it to. I didn't know if press was quite the accurate one. I would assume it found under the correct one, but there's tons of different reasons why they couldn't respond, and that's totally fine. But in the off chance that one of the developers happens to come across this video, if they wanted to see first what the discussion was before they decide to ask before they decide to answer, or maybe just pops up in the recommended video in the future, I figured I would ask the questions on here, and hopefully they could maybe forward the questions and get back to me, because despite the fact the discussion is over and I've already had it, I still have these questions that I would love to know the answer to. So I'll ask the questions now. Hopefully they would answer. So there doesn't seem to be a set definition of what a collectathon is, and there's a lot of debate among players. As one of the pioneers of the genre, if you could give a more official definition, what would you give for collectathon? The second question I had was, Games seem to be focusing on larger worlds. Games being built as sandboxes have been more common. Seems like it would be a natural fit for the 3D Collectathon platformer to go along with this and create larger worlds. But the problem with this design is it's easier for these large, vast worlds to feel empty and lonely. How do you balance making worlds larger in this new generation of more powerful hardware without making them too big that they feel empty? And do you think you hit the middle ground with Yooka-Laylee right? The third question I had was, in Super Mario 64, there were 15 levels. With a high number like that, the levels were more bite-sized compared to Banjo-Kazooie, but if a player hates ice physics, there's still 13 other levels for the players to enjoy. In Yooka-Laylee, there's 5 levels, with a lot to do in them, but if that player still hates ice levels, that's roughly 20% of the game that you, as the developers, have to try to convince the players to give a chance and not skip over. What made you guys choose to go for quality over quantity philosophy by doing 5 large levels instead of 10 to 15 smaller levels? The fourth question I had was, in an interview with MCV Developed, you said you made Yooka-Laylee in about 2 years with roughly 15 staff members, and looking back, you were shocked you guys did it. But looking back at Banjo-Kazooie, you also had about 15 staff members and got the game out in 17 months. What do you think were the biggest factors that made Yooka-Laylee feel like more of a tight squeeze? The fact it was a Kickstarter game and you had to update backers regularly, the physical memorabilia, wow, it's a hard word. The physical memorabilia you had to have made for the backers, that it's a modern 3D game with higher fidelity standards, or was it something else entirely? The fifth question I had was, now we're in an online era where games can be patched. Back in the old days when a game went gold, it was done. There were occasional cases of games having a version 1.1 cartridge that fixed a bug here or there, but for the most part, once a game was out, there wasn't much the developers could do to correct anything. Nowadays, even when a game goes gold, it's still being worked on for a day one patch that's sent out to tidy up the game. Even then, patches usually keep coming for months afterwards. Do you see this as a blessing because you can still fix any issues you guys didn't come along across during testing? Or do you think of it as something that may have caused you to overlook things you would have caught in earlier days because of a lack of safety net? Next question I had was, whose idea was it to place that one quill underneath the cliffside in the expanded Tribal Stacks Tropics near Shovel Knight? You know which one I'm talking about. And then the last question I had was, if there was one lesson that you guys learned from making Yooka-Laylee, what would you say it was? Got some strong opinions on that one, huh, Electric? I'm still surprised that I managed to find that organically when I was playing it. So, those are the questions I sent them. Those are the questions I had. I do hope at some point the developers at Playtonic will hopefully come across this video, be willing to answer my questions, shoot me an email. I will put my email, my business email, in the description. But I thank you guys for making the game. It's been a fantastic game. I enjoyed it. Wasn't a perfect game, but I mean, no game is perfect, and clearly you guys are getting better as time goes on because the Impossible Lair was fantastic as well. So that is all that I have for the discussion. Is there anything that you guys wanted to talk about that you wanted to hold off until the end of the discussion to bring up? Yeah. A lot of people found that quill at the Hunter Potion as well. You found it organically too, nice. People were bemoaning Fallout 76 for touting one of its selling points being the biggest Fallout yet, and that was before the Fiat. I know. Yep. Oh, 76 represents a turning point. AAA companies making bigger games for the sake of bigger games. I don't know, because, like, companies are still constantly making mistakes all over the place. I mean, granted, it's easy to point out the huge mistakes and, you know, ignore the great games, but they just keep making these awful mistakes. People, they're ignoring the warning signs of what people want and just keep going through. You have Fallout 76, you have Mass Effect Andromeda, you have Anthem. Like, there's just so many games that come out that people are just not happy with, but there's clear warning signs. They don't listen. Secret Skull is the fact they weren't on the total screen at all. Very interesting. I don't mind it. I think it's kind of cool. I actually like that. I think it's really nice because it gives a extra hidden objective to find, and when you come across it, it definitely feels even better. It feels more cool. I actually like them. Oh yeah, go for it, Bryman. What do you have? What did you want to say about the controls? I'm gonna pull up the name of that person. What person? Because Andromeda had some issues. I mean, that's BioWare. Well, that's EA. EA, as time has come out, EA they have this thing called BioWare magic, where they've never really thought about having to get anything taken care of or working. Hi. I'm sorry you couldn't get all the 100 coins.
What?
I'm sorry you missed one of the blue coins and couldn't get the 100s before.
I got the 100 now coin. I got the 100.
You got the 100 coin star?
Yeah.
Yeah, good job. You're doing great.
I'm sorry if I'm screaming.
It's okay, I had the door closed.
Crew came in here to see if he could hear my scream in here, but I guess because the door's closed, he couldn't hear.
Apparently chat couldn't hear you before.
Sorry.
It's okay.
That's a cute thingy with the cape.
Yeah. EA has said that basically when it came to any kind of game made by BioWare, they didn't really try to change anything or tweak anything. Apparently the workplace at BioWare was extremely toxic because of the pressure that EA put on them without kind of giving them any kind of extra work, anything extra to work with to make it easier. And every single time, BioWare still managed to pump out the product in time, and it was very well received. And apparently the spokesperson referred to it as BioWare magic. So basically, they didn't change anything. They still applied the same amount of pressure, let people go like fucking crazy, take 10 years off of life and the amount of stress that they had making these games. And it didn't matter. They got the game out, and they just referred to it as BioWare magic. It's fucking awful. So yeah, Mass Effect Andromeda was one of those examples of games that was awful. That came out, was very critically panned and user panned, and starting to see the cracks through the wall. So we'll see. I don't know. I mean, I feel bad for the developers. They're put into that shitty situation by superiors that they can't do anything about. But yeah, no, BioWare is Mass Effect Andromeda is definitely one of those examples. Magic, shitty magic. What I mean is, like, the roll in the impossible lair is a lot better. If it transitioned to a 3D space, it has a lot of potential. There wouldn't be a stamina meter. You would have a lot more control over the roll, and roll jumping off of ledge in a 3D space would be more versatile than the roll in the first Yooka-Laylee. I would remove the double jumps, so that would force level designs to more tight focused. Ground pound into the spring jump. Ground pound into a booster roll. Impossible Lair also has the ability to jump on enemies. I would have had that as necessary in the next 3D platformer. There's just a lot that the future Yooka-Laylee 3D platformer could do to make movement like more fluid and acrobatic. I also have puzzles to be solved in multiple ways where the first game fell to that. Yeah, so like these are all drastic changes, huge changes. I mean, in the original Banjo-Kazooie, that was the thing that they had it so you can jump on enemies, but all it did was it kicked them back. Their whole thing wasn't about that you could just jump on them like you could in Mario. It was about attacking them with the other abilities. It was going and making it so you can't do a double jump changes everything about the landscape of these levels. It's a completely different way that you move and continue going through the game and platform in a platforming game. By removing these, they're approaching everything completely different. They could go into the next game with this idea in mind and create a new game for it, but it's definitely a lot more different from the vision in your head when you're completely removing one of the basic functions for movement. These are pretty drastic changes for it. It could work, absolutely. But these are real drastic changes you're suggesting. I'm still not a huge fan of the stamina meter, to be honest. I really kind of wish they would remove the stamina meter. I'm just not a huge fan of it. I think it seems arbitrary. I think it really it reminds me of like in shooters when you'd be shot at, so you just kind of have to crouch and cover and wait for 30 seconds. And do nothing and just wait and really hope that an enemy doesn't come up from around the side and shoot you one more time and there's nothing you can do. You just kind of sit there and wait. It's really boring. It's the same thing with the stamina meter. I'm not a fan of the stamina meter. I don't like the idea that you play through the game and then all of a sudden you need to stop and wait, because you just need to wait for the stamina meter to come back before you can do anything else. I'm not a fan of mechanics that basically force you to sit there and wait. I'd rather at least keep doing something, you know? Now it's just severely unhealthy crunch on your workers. Yep. Well, the thing is, if they hit strike 3, that's the thing that sucks, is it's EA. There's a solid... I'm shocked that they have not closed BioWare down. That goes against everything that EA has pretty much built up to that point for their reputation. The fact that they have not shut down BioWare is a miracle. It's very odd. So if they have a strike 3, that's not going to mean shit to EA. That's going to mean everything to BioWare. BioWare is the one who's going to have to take the brunt of it because everyone's going to be fired. That studio is going to be shut down. They're all going to have to find new jobs. That EA is going to be fine. They'll lose money, but they're doing fine. They made fucking billions of dollars on FIFA alone. Pretty much everyone did Among Us. It's not even like a pet yeah. It's just like it's just a mechanic that everyone seemed to grasp onto, where you get shot and they have to hide and wait for it to come back. I will save that for later. Oh, it's an hour and 20 of commentary on this. Holy shit. Oh, I meant to watch this. That's right. I want to watch this, but this was just so much I could not watch this in research in time. Oh, they mentioned the person who did it? Okay. Cool. Hopefully that means that company is listening to us. It's insane. Oh, they're awesome. They're sure they're so fascinating to watch. I just remember looking at them like, I can't watch all these in time for research for the discussion. I can watch like 4 hours of videos per discussion basically, and then I spend a lot of time reading articles and jotting down notes of important tidbits. All right, maybe if I had like a month to do each of these discussions, I would absolutely do that, but going like a week to 10 days for each of these discussions. Dude, my hair's all fucked up. I need a haircut so bad. Kev Bayless, isn't he the Jinjo guy? The guy who the Jinjos are based off of? Alright. I think that's about it for the discussion. So thank you to everyone who was here for the discussion. Like I said, the next topic, the next game we'll be discussing is Portal 1 and Portal 2. We will be toppling both of them at the same time. Because while Portal 1 is significantly important, it's also a very, very short game. We'll probably get it done in like one stream. So we'll do Portal 1 and then Portal 2, and then we'll tackle both of them at the same time, have a discussion on those. We'll be starting that tomorrow. I'm trying to think what else. Obviously, this discussion will be going up on YouTube. This will be in the playlist. So if you have at all enjoyed lurking here for the discussion, I have 4 other videos. This is episode 5 of the Design to Play series. I have 4 other videos where we talk about significant games that we can learn a lot from, where we talk about Bioshock, Bioshock 2, Banjo-Kazooie Nuts and Bolts, Amateur Prime, and now the 5th one being Yooka-Laylee. These are great videos, I think, to do in the background as like kind of like podcast listens while we talk about this stuff. And thank you for linking the YouTube channel. Hopefully we will see you next week for the next discussion. And I appreciate it. I don't think there's anything much else to say. Sorry this episode took so long. It was a rough week, but we managed to get through it, and you guys are great. Thank you all for watching, and you all have a wonderful rest of your night. See you.